Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolo Grasso, and I'm joined by two lovely, lovely friends across the world spread out here to talk about some movies together with me. We have on one side Randy Burrows from the Uncut Gems podcast, and on the other, Jak-Luke Sharp, the editor in chief of clapperltd.co.uk. How are you doing, guys? Randy, it's been a while since we've had you on the pod. Have you been reading anything good recently?
Oh, look, I'm thrilled to be here. I miss you guys. This is going to be really cool to hang out. And yeah, Jack was just sort of wondering, what I thought of this film. I'm looking forward to get into it. This film, what is Psycho? Yeah, it should be a good one. Sort of,
So they say. So
yeah,
they say.
yeah. Wasn't
Uh,
familiar with this little film, so it was really fun to get into it.
Underseen. This is what we do on this podcast. We talk about underseen films, right? Underseen books.
Yes.
Uh, and also lovely to have you back again, Jack. After our Cloud Atlas conversation, you're here again for another classic. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. This one should be a bit more simple. This should be a bit more straightforward. A lot less about politics and social discourse. I'm sure that'll be added. It was an easier read. It was interesting. I've sort of gone I, through the serial killer thing. I read because of the Oasis boom in the UK. I've read two books about Oasis. One Supersonic and one called What's the Story about Ian Robertson. Supersonic's really good,
Okay.
but the What's the Story one wasn't very good. But I've been reading John Niven's Kill Your Friends and hit the sequel to it. I'm just halfway through it now, and those are if this was, let's say, edgy for its time, those two books now are incendiary in topic, language,
Was Kill
very
Your
difficult.
Friends adapted with like Nicholas Holt? Was that the
Yes,
one?
yeah, by
Ah,
Owen Harris directed it. Yeah,
oh
the John Niven
gosh.
book. Yeah, the book is like that. If that's hardcore, that film as well. It's not hardcore. It's quite gruesome.
Yeah.
The book is deranged. It's vile. Seriously like grim. And then I'm it's a further detail compared to the film. The film's slightly watered down, and I'm reading the sequel now, which is like Michael Jackson, um, leaving Neverland inspired. I'll leave it like that because I went into it. But yeah,
That
yeah.
sounds dark. Yeah, very
Oh,
dark.
it is. It's truly like horrific. Really
Jeez.
difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah, really, really haunting stuff done in a really sort of uh, childish and uh, I just I don't know.
Well, heavy reading.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
sounds like
difficult stuff.
okay.
Difficult stuff. Yeah. So
Uh,
this will be a breeze. This is the
for
breeze.
sure, for sure. Jeez. Of course, today we are. By the time this episode comes out, it's October. You know, fall season is here. We're starting to get into this mood for Halloween. So why not talk about one of the classics of the slashers genre? Some would say, but just a classic all around. Today we're talking about Robert Bloch's 1959 book Psycho, the 1960 masterpiece by Alfred Hitchcock, and a little bit also about the 1998 shot for shot remake by Gus Van Sant.
Wouldn't it be better if you put her someplace?
You mean an institution? A madhouse? People always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring? Have you ever seen the inside of one of those places? The laughing and the tears, and the cruel eyes studying you. My mother there. But she's harmless. She's as harmless as one of those stuffed birds.
I am sorry. I only felt. It seems she's hurting you. I meant well.
People always mean well. They cluck their thick tongues and shake their heads and suggest oh so very delicately. Of course, I've suggested it myself. But I hate to even think about it. She needs me. It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
Randy, I know this was the first time for all of us reading Robert Bloch's book, but I'm wondering what was your experience like going into Psycho? I think usually we like to try and, have this be a bit more structured when talk about the book, talk about the movie, but it is really, really hard to separate Psycho, like going into the novel, not thinking about the movie, right? How was your experience going
Yeah,
into
yeah.
this?
That's an excellent point because um, I had seen this little film Psycho previously. And actually, I've seen this little film Psycho many times and I'm very familiar with it. So, um, getting around to the source material, Robert Bloch's book Psycho, I found it incredibly familiar. So, I'm just wondering, like,
Hmm.
is part of this process of reading this being buoyed by the fact that I know this material so well and I know these characters so well, because it is fairly close. Like I'm sure we'll get into the differences, um, but just in terms of plot, in terms of sequence of events, like it was a pretty faithful adaptation. So like I do know the beats here. So w- as I'm reading this, I'm trying to sort of separate what I know about the story and the text that I'm reading. Um, so in doing so, I think I describe this book this way. It's a page turner. It's an easy read. It's enticing. It's interesting. The size of the chapters are just work totally for me. 8 to 12 page chapters and move on. So
Yeah.
I can easily sit and read a chapter or if I have a bit of time, read three. So it was very very easy on the uptake. Um, so yeah, but untangling what I know from the film and what I'm being fed in the book, that was a little bit of a piece for me. But what I will say that I found quite interesting in the text were some of the differences. And I guess that's where I am with this. Like the whole thing I think was pretty good, but what I'm drawn to is like what are the differences? What did I not really know from the character or all the dialogue around this film over the last 65 years? And there are some slight changes with the character. I think that Norman is a little bit more of a dirtbag and has a little bit more by way of
A
skeletons in
creep.
in the closet here. So that's sort of interesting. So some of the backstory with the mother and her old boyfriend. So some of these pieces were um, new to me in a way, I guess.
Hmm.
And then I would try to figure, okay, well, was this in Bates Hotel or something? Because some of it felt familiar. So there's just so much discussion around this film. I did find it difficult at times to untangle things. But another thing that I really liked in the writing is that, and I don't think anyone can really legitimately read this book in this day and age. Even with a fleeting familiarity with Psycho, I don't think you can read this as it was originally intended because
Hmm.
it's built around the twist coming at the end, and you can see that there's a sneaky savvy that Block is doing with the writing. Like he's setting up these dialogues between Norman and his mother, and so it's a dialogue exchange. But when you really look at it, you can see, oh wait, I can see in the writing here there are not two characters in play, right? I'm just
Hmm.
reading the dialogue. So I'm actually in Norman's head. So this was an experience where I'm a little bit more inside the head of Norman Bates, but also of the other characters as well, like just in terms of um, you the guilt that is it Mary in the
Mary
book?
Crane.
Mary, yeah.
Mary,
Yeah,
yeah.
so like the guilt that she has about taking the money and going to meet Sam, her fiance, like this self discussion, like we're much more in the heads of the characters, and it's
Mm.
not there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't slow the pace. It's not superfluous in any way. Like it's all good. Like this is just, but it's very pulpy, right? So it's very enjoyable and it's very briskly paced. But we are, I think, a little bit more inside the heads of the characters in the book, and I enjoyed that. But I feel like every
Totally.
sentence I say it's alongside of already knowing everything from the film. Like it's a really it was a really weird film to unpack in a way because I have such a familiarity this small little art film from 1960. So I guess that's what I'll say about the book. Like I really enjoyed it.
Totally, totally. No, I get you. I feel very similarly. This was also my first time reading it, and I found it to be quite fast paced. Robert Bloch, this was my second book of his that I've read actually. And he's just very good at what he does. It's not, I would say it's almost similar to what Stephen King does, where it's not elevated writing per se in the sense of what people consider great literature, but it is just really, really well written. It's just like constantly on the move, constantly keeping you engaged despite spending a lot of time into the character's mindset, as you were saying. A good sense of time and place. That's something that I'm always looking for in a book. It's just like you can feel the shallowness, dirtiness of this motel. Sorry, you can feel the sweatiness coming off of Norman Bates. But yeah, no, I found it quite good. I'm curious, you Jack, how did you feel about this novel going into it?
Well, I came in it from the similar angle to Randy, although with a slight twist, because obviously you knowing the legacy of the book, and obviously with the film in itself, I think the destination's inevitable. You know where it's going to climax. So for me, it was somewhat a part of experiencing the journey, just to see basically how it was adapted. Because obviously at the time it's quite a scandalous production, it's a scandalous release, it's built on infamy before it gets released, and then there's a whole nobody can watch this 1 minute after it starts, and all of the Cineplex and stuff like that. So it has a certain legacy of adaptation in terms of what they were able to get away with in the 1960s. And reading the book, I sort of just basically have to say the same as what you two said. It's a very easy, breezy read. The one thing I was slightly trepidatious about going into this is obviously being from 1960, not having read a particular type of pulp books like this or this murder mystery stuff.
Hmm.
Is I was interested to see a how it would frame itself, and b the use of language in it. I was really interested to know if it was going to be a slightly edgy for its time, and it really wasn't either. It wasn't in any way trepidatious to read at all. It was incredibly simplistic, very, very simplistic to read. I think that's an issue that will come back a little bit later on with certain problems the book has. But in terms of sort of language and description and depiction, it was interesting to see the two biggest differences, obviously, with Norman Bates' character, which how it's depicted in Anthony Perkins and Vince Vaughn, and how it's depicted here, which is interesting considering if it was released now, you would probably say that would be too on the nose, too archetype. It would be too much of quite literally incel corner, if I may say so myself. So,
Yeah, they
um,
describe him as like a fat, ugly,
yeah,
older.
sweaty,
He's like
yeah, dirty,
45 or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very simplistic, and it seems it was interesting from a viewpoint of the 1959. It didn't that felt slightly ahead of its time then. Now it feels like it's gone ahead of its time, then being counterintuitive, and now being too far on the nose. So it's just interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting way of
It's
how.
going back and
Yeah,
it's
yeah, it's going back and
the
forth. Yeah,
pendulum
yeah,
swinging.
it's like a very strange game of tennis, back and forth. That no one wants to drop a point, but it's an interesting read. I think time has somewhat been kind to this, and then not in other terms. I think yes, I think it'd be quite an interesting read at the time. Again, slight infamy on it, but now it feels very mundane in depiction, very mundane in certain contexts. Although I was somewhat surprised of how expressive it is, and the head was cleaned off, and there's certain terminology where I think it goes there and then goes back. But I think it's very clear throughout this book to me that Robert Bloch is very much interested in looking at the psyche.
Mhm.
Not
Mhm.
really interested. I think it's interesting when we look at Hitchcock's depiction of that. And just to be very brief and to put this little opening to bed, it seemed to me, and I don't want to be cruel here, a rather easy book to develop. It didn't really fit to an adapt. I don't think this gives much headache or much um, thought or let's say jigsaw puzzle to put that together to get it to adapt. Now, granted, I think the only issue he's got there is the censors of the time of
Mhm.
1960 censorship. And I think when we talk about 1998's version, which I'm sure we'll get into, I'm really glad we wanted to talk about that because I feel like no one wants to talk about it. If anyone out there, I wrote a column for Clapper a couple of months ago, it might have been last year, about why I
I
think
think
that
it was,
film was
yeah.
yeah, is a masterpiece in its own right, depicting the nothingness that is the auteur theory. But we'll get that into a little bit later. I won't go too
Hold
deep
your
into it.
horses. Hold your
Yeah,
horses.
yeah. It's a fascinating film and multiple avenues, but it was interesting to see what Hitchcock saw there and what he would fight against and what Gus Van Sant had a look at and could then develop into further with. I think the
Yeah.
Norman Bates character is a bit more edgy, but it was a really interesting read. And we spoke about this off air after Cloud Atlas, and you're like, "Oh, it's a very breezy read. We'll get it in August." And I was like, "Oh my god, Nick! Like, I don't think I'll be able to read that quick." No, this one really. I think I did four sit downs at work during my break. I think 4 90-minute breaks I had, and I was like
Yeah.
bang straight through it. Yeah, it was a really good read. I think the one thing, just again, just before I end this, the one thing I think you not to as a positive, I think it's one thing that's just a knock-on effect is that I think you just want to see that how it deals with the finale, which is again has this infamy with the Hitchcock um, beat for beat ending. I think, which I was surprised of how on the nose that was as well. It's almost like shot for shot in a certain way.
Yeah.
Aside
Yeah.
from not, I think not being in a well, I think change of, let's say, background. But this is a really interesting read, and it was interesting that we talked about this last time because we both didn't know it was there's a trilogy of books as well. And having watched the Psycho 2, which is a really good film as well, really underrated, and watching Psycho 3 and 4, Psycho 4 takes a lot of Norman Bates' childhood with his mother. That's
Mhm.
what's like sort of put in there. So this book was like, oh, they're taking a lot more information. So it's interesting to see what was adapted in a franchise
Yeah.
analysis. But going back to the film again, really interesting, really good. Surprised but not shocked, if I can say that.
Makes sense. Yeah. No, I agree. I was expecting it to be pretty much what it was. I was not surprised. I think the only surprise was just how quickly it went by. I think it was similar with me, where it took me 2 or 3 days to read it, and not like actively reading, but just like you were saying, Randy, as well. Just oh, you have like a few minutes here, just read a chapter before bed, maybe read 2 or 3, and it's 17 chapters or 18
Hmm.
Yeah.
chapters. Like you can go through them fairly quickly. I do have one problem about this book, and you kind of touched on this actually, Randy. It's not so much that Robert Bloch telegraphs the ending, but he does love very blunt foreshadowing. And there's like many quotes that I wrote down that mention this because it was just making me laugh every time. But I have especially one quote when she's very like Mary Crane has stolen the money, she's on the run, she's very tired, she's thinking about what to do, what not to do, and there is this line that says, "Sure, she'd be dead tired, but it wouldn't kill her, and nobody would ever know." I'm just like taking it back. It's like that's not. I don't know, like subtext is for cowards type things. It's not even subtext. It's just blatantly setting it up for the kill, like, oh, something's gonna go wrong, like right from the opening. That was the other big surprise for me. The opening chapter is from Norman Bates' perspective. Like we
Hmm.
open introducing this character, and he's talking
Mm.
about like, oh, I know the Oedipus complex, and I love books about psychology. I'm aware of the relationship I have with my mother. I love the occult as well, and she doesn't like those books that I'm reading, which threw me on a loop. I don't know how you guys feel about Norman Bates in this book, especially because that's the main character, right? Like that's who we start with, that's who we end with.
Um, I'll just jump in here, just on your point, Niccolo, about some of these heavy-handed foreshadowing, and this is so obvious. Like I noted that as well, right?
Okay.
And have like it was like being two people, page 103. That's what I'm, you know,
There you go, right?
right? But it's right there. But is this the film? Is this the film ruining the book? And I think to a certain point, it might be, and it would be really hard to tell, right? Like if
Yeah.
Robert Bloch could take that back and just have his book be the masterpiece as opposed to the film, do you think like some of those get through a little bit more subtly? But here, that hit. Norman was a psychic sensitive, page 153, right? So, this type of stuff is just bonks you over the head as you read it first time through, just because the lore is so strong in the pop culture, and just
Yeah.
even without someone being immersed in the film, having seen it a bunch of times. But um, anyway, that was my comment there, and then I lost. what your question was, because that's how I roll.
No, how you feel about the Norman Bates character
Okay.
in this book? Guess. Yeah.
Well, I think
I don't
he's a
know. Maybe Jack.
dirtier.
Oh, sorry.
I think he's dirtier. I think I think that there's this, and this probably goes to um, Block's interests, because I was interested when you were talking just before we started recording about, he did a Jack the Ripper book, and see, I'm not really familiar with
Yeah.
Block, but that makes total sense. There's there's a throwaway comment in here in the book about, oh, that Gain fella upstate or something, like referring to Ed Gain. And is the character of Norman Bates loosely based on which serial killer? Like, he's loosely based on a serial killer.
Directly based on
Yeah.
Ed Gein. Yeah.
It is on Gain. Okay, yeah. So,
And that surprised me as well, right? They mention Ed Gein in the
okay.
book,
So
which I
I
also was
wondered,
not
because they
expecting.
mentioned him, is he actually, yeah, so he is the guy that Norman Bates is based on. So I think that this writer, if he were working today, I think he'd also have a true crime podcast. I think that he's just really interested in looking in, people's closets to see what the skeletons are there, and he's interested in the psychology
Oh
of the piece,
yeah.
not just the crime, but also the psychology of it. So you get
Yeah, he talks about
these.
Aleister Crowley as well and
Mhm.
occultism.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so you get these mentions of, the occult, and I forget some of the other little pieces, but there's these elements to um, Norman Bates that, he's a little bit shiftier of a guy, and then there's a psychology that's sort of running there, not just the dissociative personality, the dissociative disorder stuff, like, but there's also something, lurking and more sinister in there as well. Like, one thing that jumped out for me as, wait a second, this isn't really tracking with what I recall from the film, is that when Sam and Norman have their scene at the office, when Sam is trying to cover for Lila, who's going to go to the house. um,
Hmm.
in the book, it's a little bit different of a conceit. But the big takeaway, I think, from that scene, which is different in the book, and it's like, wait, this isn't quite tracking, is that Sam is the aggressor in the film, but in the book, Norman is he's the aggressor here, right? Because he is, um, like, he knocks him out, and he's trying to get him drunk, and it just plays with a much different tone, where Norman is sort of the assertive personality. And he's also very calculated, because when Arbogast, the investigators visit, threw him off and he wavered on his story, we've got a part of a chapter where he's getting in the headspace, and we're in the headspace with
Hmm.
Norman as he's calculating, okay, someone's going to follow up because this guy disappeared. Someone else is going to come, and I'm going to get my story straight. And he's very calculated going into this, and in that last exchange. So I think there's a piece here where Block is interested in, the sinister, right? What makes these evil men tick? And there's a psychology there, and there's these things going on. And then we'll talk about how that varies in the film. But I think that the Block is very sort of dialed into, what's happening with the psychology, what's happening with what are the precedents to these events, and this is the type of thing that drives this to a certain point, and we get these glimpses at a different form of a Norman. Like, I know that in the book he's also, like more of an incel, as you guys were saying, and that sort of tracks. But also, I think that, yeah, there's something very, sinister there in terms of the thought process as well. So.
Hmm.
I think the two are weirdly connected in a sense that I think, like, just to begin on the foreshadowing, because I think it's connected to the depiction. Is that I think it's a product of its time. And I think this is I'll make sense when I talk about Norman Bates in a second. But I think you're talking about the late 50s. We're going into the 60s. We're going to very soon be in the Beatles era. We're going to talk about psychedelics, the hippies, Charles Manson, CIA, MK Ultra. I think it's an era from the 50s and sixties where I think America is just it has expansiveness of television becomes the norm. Radio, small towns like this, just blossom into the United States of America. It stops being divided states, going across states line and like what Mary Crane does disappears. I think the world opens up in the 60s, especially in America. And it's interesting. I think we look at the the depiction and discussion of mental illness through that era as well, which is not particularly fond thinking of like lobotomies and coming up in the 30s and being catatonic and dropping Valiums on people's wives because they have an opinion, stuff like that. And I think the one thing, and again, not to think for Robert Bloch, but I think there's a point here of, well, how can I totally put one side of Norman Bates not being an anti-hero? And I think it's all about occultism, about psychology, about someone in a small town who probably thinks he's bigger than he is, or he has a. This is not a slight on my behalf. I'm saying I think this is what his opinion is. Is that he's just trying to maintain a total distraction or differentiation between Norman Bates and the average blue collar Sam Joe, which
Hmm.
is Norman thinks more highly of himself maybe because he's more academic. I think there's definitely a sensibility there where I think he's trying to separate the two of, well, Sam's a blue collar American and he's doing the right thing. Norman's very strange. So therefore Norman must like things that develop on the brain and think about the brain, think about the person and the mindset. I just think that's very much an era thing. And I think the foreshadowing is to double down on that, just totally make sure that the audience know this person's not very good. I think there's a lack of trust, perhaps, maybe because of the edginess of the novel at the time. I think if we're talking about this in 1959, I think we'd probably be a bit different. If we had Jak-Luke on, he could probably talk to us about that era. I'm not too sure. But then that comes into the idea of depiction and Hitchcock's thing, where I think the two are so different. Again, there's a visualization through weight and mannerisms and dependency. But I think what Hitchcock does and what is an issue of an era in itself in the 60s in the different literature and cinema is that it has to make him, and that it has to make him a person who's being taken over by something he cannot control. I think the censor does not allow that person to be just a cold-blooded murderer. I don't think the censor allows him to play archetype. It's got to be a sweet young boy who loves his mom, who's just gone the wrong path, who can be helped, but he's very, very ill. But he's a young blue-collar boy. He just wants to get out there, but there's this woman's on the back of him, this thumb on the back of his head. I think that's the issue with the film's depiction as well, where I think Hitchcock's having to struggle with a censorship of he can't depict him in the way that Bloch does. I think there's then an amalgamation of the two. I think it probably gets it just about right. But I think that's the issue with the film is that I think Anthony Perkins plays it really well in the way that he's being asked to do it, where there's obviously someone ill there, but there's also something behind the eyes where there's someone who just thinks he's doing his best, and there's a difficulty of watching that as a viewer because you know that man's very ill,
Hmm.
you know that he just wants to do the best by his mother, but I never got that in the book. I find that someone who is just perhaps because you know the backstory with the depiction of his mother and the boyfriend and stuff. I think if that was left slightly more, like you said, Nick, if it wasn't so on the nose with the writing, and you were left a little bit allow the viewer to to dissolve and discuss that within themselves after the reading, I think it would be far better in fruition. But the fact that I think he did well in a certain way, he puts a noose around the neck and he tightens it and he doesn't allow the viewer to be the judge, jury, and executioner. It's Robert Bloch who does, and I think he sort of throws him off the noose, Norman Bates, in figurative speaking. I think he damns him to his own fate, which is okay. But I think again for the time, it's just the 1950s, 1960s literature, isn't it? Just, but then again, you look at Anthony Burgess in the 70s with A Clockwork Orange. The 10-year difference there is that being able to get such horrible characters in the book and not have to have the audience feel for them. It's just
Like no
um,
moralizing and no trying to make you
yeah,
sympathetic. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's a difficulty because when you get into the let me put it this way: when you read this book and you let it develop, it doesn't feel like Norman Bates is slowly but surely being pushed into a corner, and he has to do the things he's doing. The book sort of writes him in a character who's very calm, very cool, and incredibly calculate, knows what he's doing, knowing to put the tire tracks over and driving over this, and knowing that someone's not. I know he doesn't get right all the time, but trying to go over his story, knowing about the names of the characters, not in a way that this character is sort of fleeting at trying to find answers and make sure his mom doesn't get in trouble. The
Yeah.
book is very like he's very cruel and calculated in the book, whereas I think in the film, partly to Perkins' depiction, it feels like a character there who just is just in the shit, think, "Oh my god, what do I do? What do I do?" And then slowly but surely, as the film develops, you see him backed against the wall. And I think as a character development occurs there, you sort of this is going to sound slightly morbid here, but you slowly come to terms with the fact of, oh my god, like like he's not evil. Like I think it gets you on board the film. I think it gets you on board with the sense of immersion and wanting that character not to succeed, but not to succumb to a fate that's perhaps not indebted to his character. Whereas in the
Mm.
book, that man there is just like you want him to drown in that pool of shit with the other cars and the bodies. Don't you just there's no that you don't want that character to survive. And I think again, granted, looking at the both depictions, what's probably the edgier or easier thing is the amalgamation of the two. I think both of them are just two distinct differences of depictions of Norman. But I think the film does a better job of not wanting them to succeed, but just sort of feeling the plight and the pressure of like this is a man who's like really ill, doesn't know it. You
Totally,
don't
yeah.
really know it as an audience as well. But why did you say it again with the depiction in the book, Nick, with the foreshadowing and the heavy-handedness of it all? You feel like Robert Bloch has sort of just led him to the wolves here. Like this is a bad person. That's all we need to know. But Mary Crane, though, Mary Crane has a change of heart. She has a change of heart. I just think to me I don't know. There's an interesting conversation there, but I don't know. Maybe that's a different topic. I don't know, but
I think
it's an interesting one.
no, totally. I think it speaks to the to just the medium of literature. I think, and I'm interested after this to actually jump into the movie head on, because I think there's something that you can pull off in literature that you couldn't do in a movie. And in this case, I think everything that you said, Randy, about the conversations between Norman and his mother, Norma, you don't like, you barely have them in the movie because you cannot actually show her without actively lying to people. So she always has to be in the shadow. You don't see the corpse when he's carrying her down the staircase. But in the book, he can just be talking to her, and it's fine because he's talking to mother. And that's just a different type of medium that allows to have this deeper look into the psyche of the characters and whatnot. But what I found very revealing, and it's probably the only main, not even difference, but just addition that the book has over the film, and it goes into what you were saying, Jack, is that in the final chapter, it goes fully into like journalist mode. Like, here is the
Mm.
aftermath, here's how the people were reacting, the comparison to Ed Gein. Like, it goes into this final chapter that's more about the aftermath of these crimes, the discovery of previous crimes as well, a lot of hearsay, a lot of gossip, and just the legend that is born of Norman Bates. Oh, he wanted to dress like a woman, he wanted to be like his mother, he was, cutting off people's limbs, and just all this infamy related to him. I found that to be quite interesting and again revealing to Bloch's interest, where he doesn't feel
I agree.
any shame or regret in like you were saying, Jack, completely throwing this guy under the bus, making him completely redeemable. Which again, fair enough, he's a killer, but also in the way that he portrays it, the fact that like when Lila is going through the apartment and she's looking at all the books that he has, I had the flashback, Randy. There's also like erotica books and like old pornography and something like that.
Yeah.
That he goes into.
Which
He's
in
like,
the
oh my god, he was
60s would
reading
be pretty
occult
underground
and
stuff.
porn. Totally,
Yeah.
totally, and even the violence. It's not more violent per se, but just the moments of death, the two moments of instances of death, are more gruesome in the book as well. Again, things you can get away with on a literary level compared to a cinematic one at the time, but yeah, it plays into this general darkness that Bloch was very much interested in.
That ending there. I know I don't want to jump it here. But that exhibits the best part of this book and also its weakest. In that, I quite like that it's quite ahead of its time
Hmm.
in touch of like yes, like you look at social media now, there are whispers, and then it comes to full on facts, like fake news, gossip, the idea of like you said, the podcasts and stuff. It's like first hand, second hand, like on thousand hand, um, you know, factual analysis now. And it's interesting to look at that in a sense of looking at perhaps a doctor's report of it but also the fact of like, well, but he could have been this, he could have been that, he could have been this, he could have been that. But it's also like very much small town mentality. I don't see any disrespect there, but whispers go around, then it becomes fact, then it becomes legend, myth, then it becomes fact again, and then like so and so and so forth. But on the same token, the way it's stylized is just like explain it dead and explain it right to the bone to me. There's just such a lack of like inventiveness to allow the audience to unravel that character in a
Hmm.
sense the same as Norman. Is that Norman has no idea, within reason, let's say, that this is actually happening in the sense of like he has his own projection of reality, which is somewhat ironic considering the finality of the book and the book in particular, in that everyone around him now has this warped sense of reality, what is true, what is fact, which is it's quite interesting. Consider, I suppose there's a vicious irony there, but the, in that whole sense, he just has to hold the reader's hand. I just think having that and not really knowing, and granted, this might have not aged particularly well, and even what's being depicted now,
Which is
which I'm
fair,
sure we'll
yeah.
get on, yeah, which we'll get into later as well, which I don't think is aged greatly, but it's the 60s of its time, isn't it? But I think that not really knowing Norman's circumstances, not knowing that Norman's had this and had that and this, and just not knowing that what sort of snapped there leaves a far bitter pill to taste in the book and the film. In that that's a human being that is being able to do those crimes and um, compartmentalize those actions in his head through the vein of his own mother, who was horrible to him, and yet he's acting in his own in her best interest. There's a warped mentality there. But I think Robert Bloch, in that sense, like has to walk you down that line and be like, this happened here, this is this. And I just think there's such a lack of confidence there. And the ambiguity of it, I probably think would probably work far better at the time. But I think it's probably a detriment of its time, but also now, and I think audiences just want answers to that. I think there's a lot there in subtext and context where it's very dark. I think people need that circle to be to go through with itself. But it just sort of it just encapsulates, I think, the futureness of that film, or not like inventiveness, let's say, or looking forward in time where it's ahead of its time, but also then thinking like the way he does it though is just so heavy-handed. But I think again that encapsulates the book, doesn't it?
It's
Like what you were
yeah.
saying.
It's a choice. Why do you guys suppose Block does this? Because it certainly feels abnormal in the film, but I presume in literature as well, you don't have the last chapter and a half devoted to this, psychological breakdown. It's a choice, and I find it. I always found it curious in the film, and I guess I find it a curious choice now by the author to include it. And what I'm left with is, you know, honestly, Nicola, when you said that this guy liked writing about Jack the Ripper and he had a
It makes
fascination,
so much sense.
it it to me, I think it is exactly that, that crime podcast mentality that, well, we've got to explain this. That's what people are
I
interested in. There's evil in the world. There's these evil news stories out there. Let's get to the bottom of it. So he just chooses to, explain it. So it's the
I
journalist side of him, I suppose.
yeah, like I don't want to get too much ahead of myself, but even the fact that there is the Halloween connection with the John Carpenter
Mm.
movie, where Sam Loomis, Doctor Loomis in the film. Oh, it's a reference. But one of the strengths of Halloween, the original one for me, is that Michael Myers, the shape is just this unknowable creature. He's not a human being who puts on a mask and kills people. He just is darkness incarnate. And any attempt to explain it loses interest. On the flip side of that, you have, like you said, the true crime mentality, but just that's always what you hear. Whenever you hear about a crime, murder, whatever, one of the first things people ask is, why? Why did this happen? And so I find it definitely interesting that it's not, oh my god, he was dressed as his mother and he was trying to be his mother, but now he's being caught. The end, and that's it. But actually wants to go into the why. Like, okay, we've spent some time, we know how he was experiencing life, but let's just explain that, what he thought happened of the murder suicide of the mother is actually just him committing unknowingly committing this murder, believing that he was his mother, and just very complicated, overly complicated, I would even say in a way. But yeah, it tracks. It tracks with the true crime obsession he had
Mhm.
for his entire career. I know I read somewhere that Robert Bloch also wrote or maybe even directed an episode of Star Trek, which has
Really?
the spaceship, yeah, the crew going back in time and having like a Jack the Ripper themed adventure. I think it was maybe for the Next Generation. I don't know anything about Star Trek. This is just trivia I read on yesterday when looking into Robert
This
Bloch.
is your research.
My research
Your
is
research is
looks
showing.
obsessed, Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely have it written down episode in this season. I think this is a good point also to just like jump into the movie. Of course, it's a movie that needs no introduction. 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Hitchcock loved the book so much, and no, understandably so. He knew that the two twists, the first twist being Mary Crane, who he changed to Marion Crane, dies a third of the way into the story, and the other twist, of course, the reveal that Norma doesn't exist; she's dead. Norma is Norma. He tried to buy all of the books because it was like people need to go into this movie not knowing anything. Robert Bloch, I'm sorry, people can't read your book as the movie's coming out. People who go watch the movie, you cannot enter once it has started, which I think should be a rule to this day. It's not possible. I'm watching Formula One and people are coming in 40 minutes late, but it's fine. That's another story for another time. Um, but of course, Randy, what's your experience with Psycho? I know this was not your first time watching this little hidden gem.
No, this is when I was first getting into film. This is probably one of the first classics that I said, okay, well, if I'm really going to get into film, then what are the films I should be? So there's Casablanca, there's Psycho, there's a few others at the time that I got into. But what I'll say about Psycho is that I've always ever really, really liked this film. I think we'll get into this, I'm sure, but I think this is a film that um, mostly holds up today, even though it's clearly of its time. And yeah, I've always had an appreciation for like how clinically this is done, and I know there's a whole documentary about the shower scene. What is it, 78-52? Like just the 78
Yeah,
setups and the 52 cuts, which breaks that down, just in detail. And I haven't seen it, but I'd love to. There's just
it's pretty
so
good.
much storied Hollywood lore around this. And I think trying to put myself in the shoes of an audience seeing this in 1960, and I've got to say, this is one of those films, as you look through film history, that this is a game changer, right? Like things are different post Psycho. Things are different
Hmm.
post 2001. Things are different post Godfather, post Jaws, post Star Wars. This is just one of those, you know, really, really influential films. But having said that, just about my admiration
Oh,
for this film's standing in the industry, it's still it's a captivating film to sit through, even where you know it as well as you do. Like there's this bizarre choice. It's in the book as well, but um you know we're going to transition protagonists about halfway through or 40% of the way through. Weird choice, but it totally works. And then as you watch this, you can uh I feel you can really see a master at work. The way that music is used, the way just the opening credits, the Saul Bass credits. And I always love the idea of, you have some sort of, spectacle and music that is not part of the movie, but get you into the movie and the mood. So, like these credit sequences with some sort of visual flair, something happening. And we
yeah.
don't have too many filmmakers who still do that. Cronenberg did for a huge part in his career. Like, I remember the stuff in the 80s, like, he had a lot of what was it? I think in oh, like Crash has a nice sequence, if I'm recalling correctly. But not many filmmakers that do that, right? They just have a
I'm
credit
trying to think
sequence.
about it. Yeah.
Um, Trying to think, does Bound, the Wachowski one? Trying to, I know there's some beautiful visual flair there. But
But even then, it's like the 90s.
yeah, we're
It's
into the
not
90s,
even like
but at any rate,
2020s. I can't remember an opening sequence.
yeah,
So.
now I'm just sort of getting off point, Randy. You're off point. Okay. But you watch this, and this is an impactful score. So the musical piece during this opening with the split, which is a great thematic. So the credits and the bars,
Hmm.
the split, and then in the opening scene you have all these scenes with the window blinds, the Venetian blinds. Anyway, the twisty blinds. So you've got another sort of visual. Things are split here, just the way that you had in the opening credit sequence. And it's an impactful piece of music. And I'm like, this just doesn't really happen. You get great scores now, and but something that really is driving it being the music. You don't get that a lot. And I'm thinking like Jaws, because we watched Jaws not that long ago, and we watched it for Uncut Gems, and like that at moments in that, the score just drives that for a while. So you really get a sense in Psycho that this is a master that is just in complete control. He knows what tool to pull out of the toolkit when, and so the pacing of some of these moments when Marion is packing to leave. It's sort of a nothing scene in a way, but it's elongated, and you have these long shots and these close-ups of what Marion's looking at, and you really sort of dial into her psyche in a way that's explained in the book, but Hitchcock is sort of bringing to the fore the idea that, you know what?
Right.
Should she steal this money? Should she not steal this money? Like, you can't read her mind in terms of, oh, well, should I, go see my boyfriend, and, what should I do with this? And I can pay his debts. Like, you don't get that level of it, but you do get that she is going through a a big choice, right? And it's just the elongation of this scene, which shouldn't be as long as it is, but it's really, really effective. And then by the time we get to the parlor scene in behind the motel desk
Mm,
with Bates and with Marion, like this, the production design, the angle choice, the cut between characters, the use of close-ups. It's phenomenal stuff, and this is
perfection.
just
Yeah.
amazing filmmaking. And we're not even getting into the blitzkrieg of the shower scene, which is just an amazing construct, and is gimmicky and as sort of forced and as elevated and as escapist as it is. you know that's cinema, and it's amazing. Like, and it's also fascinating to look at in the context of the time, because cinema just did not do that type of thing. Cinema was, it created this world was adjacent to our own, but it was it was heightened. Like, something happened in like the late 60s, 7 years later, a decade later, and um cinema just sort of cracked right through the proscenium, and like the audience was just more interested in the realism of the French Connection, right? So like that proscenium wall
Hmm.
just evaporated in the next decade. Um, but Hitchcock was playing with the tools of cinema at the time, and it's this sort of escapist world, sort of connected to her own, just in terms of its values, in terms of what these characters are doing. And man, he is just using every tool in the toolbox, and it's just fascinating to watch. And then it changes, like, just a few years later, into sort of a younger generation wanting more naturalistic stuff. Yet you get something like Halloween, which I think is all about the POV, and just making something a little bit more realistic, and it's like terror on Main Street, and this type of thing. But it still goes back to Psycho, and the tactics and the
Yeah.
techniques and the stylized gimmickry, if you want to call it that, that Hitchcock employed so effectively. So yeah, that's a little bit of my take on Psycho. I sort of liked it.
Sounds like it's an alright movie at the
Yeah,
end
it's
of
all
it.
right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Pretty much with everything you said. Honestly, I don't even know what to repeat. I don't think I will repeat anything because yeah, it is as great as you mentioned. I will just point one thing. I think this movie truly is impeccably cast.
Hmm.
Especially Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins, rightfully so. They became Hollywood legends because of this movie. Not necessarily having any movie that was better than this later on in their career. Unfortunately, I think if you end up in a movie like Psycho, it's always going to be maybe the best film you will ever be in. Fair enough. But the two of them specifically are outstanding because of the facial, just the facial acting that they do here for 1960, for this type of movie, for for a thriller. Again, like the novel itself, it's not going to win a Pulitzer Prize, which is fine. It's a nice piece of pulp entertainment. But the way that they bring the characters to life, the way that Hitchcock manages to direct them without dialogue. That scene you mentioned, Randy, I love that you mentioned that scene of her pondering, stealing or not, repairing
Mm.
the suitcase and leaving the apartment. Because again, it's a throwaway scene, but there's no dialogue. You know perfectly well that any other director at the time, or even 5 years earlier, they would have had voiceover. Like you said, oh, what am I gonna do about this? Because it feels so wrong. But then again, I can save my boyfriend because he told me about his dad. Like we've seen this. Like we've seen movies like that. We see movies like that now, honestly, that don't trust their audience. And I'm watching this now. I think it was my fourth time watching it. I love Psycho. I love Hitchcock. I would never forget. I took one whole Sunday back in 20. I was like 2000 and 2010, I think. I was 13 years old, and there was a Sunday off school, just at home. They were doing a Hitchcock marathon from 6 a.m. to midnight. And I think I watched like five Hitchcock films in one day. I'd never done that before. And Psycho was, I think, the last one, or Rear Window was the last one, but it's special. It's truly, truly a special film. I'm very excited to talk about it, especially in comparison to the novel. Jack, what are your thoughts on? Do you have a hot take on Hitchcock's Psycho, or
Yes
do you
and no.
share the love?
I'm, I'm trying to sort of like I've been how I would how I would phrase this in the sort of last few days to build up to this. And I don't want it to be a backhanded compliment, but I'm a bit of backstory. I remember seeing this like in the cinema when I was about 18 at university, and looking at like I think it was like side by side with Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, just to look at camera work and look at black and white photography. And then I remember watching it on Blu-ray, and I've got both box sets of Hitchcock stuff, and I've watched it a few times, but I don't go back to it a lot, just purely because I think it's so straightforward. I don't think there's a lot more there than what you see on screen. Although I do think it's an impeccable feature, like you said, Nick. I think a product of its time, granted, but even then, it's very much ahead of its time as well. Um, I think this is less of well, this is where it becomes slightly controversial because I'm going to say like a backhanded compliment, but this is the power of adaptation here because Hitchcock takes simplicity and does not really change the merits of the writer.
Hmm.
He's not involved in
That's
that.
a
He's
good
not bothered
point.
about it.
I agree.
Yeah, he streamlines it. He gets rid of the excess fat, which is minute on this to begin with, very minute. And then what he does is he allows the cinematic craft to elevate the material, and it's the casting, which the book, like you said, Nick says there's two twists here. The book is very forthcoming with that anyway, and I think in a reading form like that, I don't think the Mary Crane thing is that outrageous. I think it's just sort of the Act One, although it's like a twist in itself, granted. But in cinematic form, when you cast an A-list like um, what you just said a
Janet
name,
Leigh.
sorry, yeah, Janet Leigh, then it adds that second step. And I think that once you go there and you get the Soul Bass opening credits and you get the score, and then you've got it on the page with a shower scene, and then you've got 78 cuts in 82 seconds of the infamous aspect it is, and you're using dark chocolate to get blood on screen. And the first film ever to have a flushing toilet, I think Psycho was as well, which is strange. You have a form there of understanding the material and then putting something on screen, and not just this is going to be an ironic talking about the film next, but there's not there's a quite interesting formality about it in the fact that Hitchcock takes Robert Bloch's stuff and does not want to alter it, disrespect the writer, but then elevates it with his own thing, and two of them can coexist. You can have the Hitchcock material and Robert Bloch's material, which I think do a really good blend here.
I will also say
Uh,
1 second, just because
yeah,
I
yeah,
often forget. Joseph Stefano wrote the screenplay. I think just like let's give him some flowers as well. Because
yeah. No, of
I'm
course, yeah,
also
yeah.
guilty. It's like it's Hitchcock, so it's like I also did write it. Joseph Stefano, you did good. It's good
Yeah,
script.
I think Stefan gets rid of the minute fat that needs to go. Just gets rid of the excess detail or just small little bits here and there, which would drag this from, the 2 hour mark, which I think is an
Hmm.
hour and 50 anyway, isn't it? And I think that Hitchcock just adds that subtlety of knowing the material, how the cinematic exploration works. I think Universal do this quite a few times, and the two other ones are made by the same filmmaker. And the one's been mentioned here already. But the next one comes with Jaws, which takes a very interesting but let's be honest, on the nose book, and then goes further into it and makes like a stellar picture about intensity and atmosphere and the unknown in the water. The Psycho is the unknown neighbor, and then the next one you have is Jurassic Park, which takes Michael Crichton's novel, elevates it, and puts
Right.
dinosaurs on screen. It's interesting that those three films, all by Universal, I don't think there's much of a running language to that. I think it just happenstance, but it's interesting that when they look at those three adaptations, they elevate it with the power of cinema. What can that do? Psycho is editing. Um, I think that again, I would probably suggest that Jaws is also editing as well, with not showing Bruce, but also the fact of that just going a little bit edgy there. And then I think again, um, I would probably say Jurassic Park is volume and iconography. It's just interesting to see the idea of how the adaptation elevates itself throughout like,
Yeah.
4 decades or 3 decades anyway. But just going back to your point, Nick, this film deserves all of its flowers. It's undoubtedly. I don't think it's particularly aged poorly either. I think black and white in 1960. I think it has this avant-gardeness as well, to it, which is
Yeah.
again like very much film bro depiction. But I think it takes that. It takes the drain out of the image. It takes the color, the hopefulness. It takes all the expression out. And I think you've got to then focus on what you said about linguistics of face. I think you've got to look at the picture in visual physicality and visualness. You can't have someone just like have makeup on and blush and hide behind that. No, the material has to speak for itself, and therefore, like a play, a theatrical experience on a literal level, you've got to have someone in that depiction of Norman Bates who can entangle the audience around its finger. You've got to have a Janet Leigh to entangle that character, and then bang, they're gone. You've got to have those type of characters and actors' performances that again elevate the material. And I think it's just on a whole a terrific concoction of the power of cinema in that it takes pre-existing material, elevates it, brings all these groups of people, which you could probably argue at the highest standards it's probably going to get. I think Hitchcock has a few great heights after that, but nothing really comes particularly close. I don't think The Birds is anywhere, stuff like that. No, I think you've got everyone just at the pinnacle of their careers. And I think it's just a great depiction. Also, I think it gets the notoriety of its age with the fact of no social media, all word of mouth, all. Have you seen Psycho? You'll never guess at the end of it. Ironic that the book's just out before, just no need to go read it. Watch the film. I think it's just the a perfect time and space where everything just came together collectively to have true, I would probably say, perfection. I watched this on a 35mm scan, or it might have been 16mm scan actually, which has been scanned through on a Blu-ray audio copy on the track on top of it. It looks stellar. It looks magnificent. I think the colours, I think the shades are black and white. I think you've got. I'm not like a huge admirer of Alfred Hitchcock in terms of like. I'm not Tarantino level of I really appreciate the work, but he's not a director where I just jump towards. I think that he's just not my cinephile. I'm a William Friedkin type of guy. I'm not. I'm not. It's probably a little bit too early for me to get that expression. Not that I'm fucking 50. I'm not that old, but I think that when you look at Hitchcock, you've got to admit though, the man who went from black and white cinema with the silent era to then making black and white cinema like Jack the Ripper, and then going into the 40s and 50s, making films with technical and looking at the abstracts of editing. To then in 1960 go back to color. I think showcases a director who's gone on a really interesting journey, who's learned his craft. Too much now. I think filmmakers just jump into black and white photography, and I've never used it. Don't know how to
Light it.
light a
Hmm.
person, and this is just not white people. I think uh, on their like different ethnicity, angles, the use of camera, the texture, film, celluloid. I think Hitchcock has built up a long time, 30 years to Psycho, working on the British films in the 30s, then jumping to America in the 40s. I think it's a director who just at that point is, I know how to make that. I've done that before. I've learned that. I've learned craft. I know what lighting is. I did it when I first went into cinema. Color is a second language for him. Going back to black and white, I think you can tell that this man is utterly understandable of the work. I think if you had a different director of a different era, and I'm not going to shit on anyone there. I'm not going to name names or anything like that. I'm not even going to try to attempt to do that. But I think if you get a director who's worked in color throughout that era, the 50s and 60s, and then goes to monochrome, I think you have a different film. Have you someone who has a difficulty with camera? I think you have shadows, and especially with the depiction of his mother in certain scenes. Perhaps even the ending with the frame on frame. I think you've got a lack of someone understanding how those link up. So I think Hitchcock worked up to this with a stellar career, and I think even making Psycho and then having another, what is it? I think he's got what 90? Is it? Did he die in 1970?
When did he
Oh my
die?
god,
He died in
It's like
80s, I think.
1976.
76, 77. No, wait.
What is it? When did he
Yeah, it would
die, or
be.
when
I
was
think
his
it's
last film?
76. It's Frenza.
Yeah, that's like 76.
Friends in 72, Family Plot. The last one is
Family Plot.
76.
Right.
Yeah,
And he
then
died
he
in
gets 80,
1980.
I
So
think. Yeah.
4
Yeah.
years later, yeah.
yeah. So I think for what is essentially 16 years after this, I think he hit the jackpot, and I think he could probably just retired on the esteem of that alone. And I think as a filmmaker, just does not well. He's a filmmaker. He knows nothing else, and I think you can tell by that filmography where he's just trying to test himself. Push, push, push. What can I do next? What can I do next? And I think that Psycho at the time, again, is just that perfect amalgamation to surprise your audience, to showcase that you're confident in the body of work, and also have other distinctive things. Because aside from the credit sequence and stuff like that, or the title sequence, Bond in '62 with Got to Know comes after that, doesn't it? It does set the precedent for a lot of cinematic texture as well. So I don't think Psycho can just be discussed and dismantled in the term of an adaptation. I think it has a major, and this is granted, this is slightly redundant what we're talking about, but it has a large influence in the topic of cinema on a whole, especially the experience of cinema in the auditorium. So I'll let it go on, but yeah, the film is just a huge iceberg of collective discourse that runs through depiction, MPAA, censorship, cinematic release, audience response. There's just it's a
The list goes
seismic.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a seismic influence, undoubtedly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering in which ways do you guys think, because like bringing it back primarily to like the comparisons with the book. I think you said it even in the beginning, Randy. There's not major differences here outside of the character of Norman that we already talk about. Anthony Perkins is much nicer looking, much younger, slim. You trust him. That's part of the appeal of the film. It's like, oh, you see this guy, he couldn't be the killer. There's no reason for him to be the killer. It's definitely the mother. And then surprise, surprise at the end. Even though you see the darker side developing throughout the movie, like in the book. But I think for me, if I were to narrow it down, especially to like one major difference, I think it's probably just the opening. Because if again trying to go into that mentality of watching Psycho without knowing anything, if you're reading the book, you pick up a book named Psycho, first chapter, Norman Bates, old, fat, sweaty, reading occult and porn. He has a mother. It's like the insult culture. It's like, oh, okay, like, this guy's a bit weird. Yeah, like it's not all in one place. And then you go to Mary Crane. With Hitchcock, it's a movie called Psycho, and it starts with this very, at the time, boundary pushing scene. By the way, just gorgeous, almost seamless tracking shot that they tried to do. They couldn't pull it off technology wise, but they tried to have like this helicopter shot going into the window of the room with Marion Crane and Sam post sex, which again was very shocking for the very boundary pushing for the time. But he goes into that, and so if you don't know who the real psycho of the movie is, you see this woman who gets the allure of the money. She steals it. She goes on this trip. Is it right? Is it wrong? She's kind of losing her mind. She could easily be the psycho, and so that's when the lack of the narration from Block, that foreshadowing that she's feeling that tired that she could kill for a shower or some nonsense like that. Like, she could die, sorry, she could die for a shower, like, and things like that. You don't have them, and so you're not expecting violence. You're not the music says it, but the music is also just good as a thriller. You hear it when she's driving the car, it's fine, it's thrilling, it's exciting. So that when you get to the shower scene, it's not shocking because oh, the lead character is dying. It's shocking because there's very little in the movie that prepared you for that. Well, in the
Mhm.
book, there's so many references in the writing that they're just making you wait for this violence that, similar to the film, it's not too long. I want to say it's like 2 paragraphs, maybe. Curtain, blade, she dies, decapitated, and whatnot. But in the film, the impact feels much major. And even
Mhm.
the aftermath, that's another thing that I love about Hitchcock and revisiting it. I forgot. It is a 1 hour and 50-minute film. Feels so much shorter because there's so many instances of procedural crime cleaning,
Yeah.
or even crime being committed. There's the entire scene of Marion buying it, like renting a new car, that goes on for a while, just building tension. You see Norman cleaning up the bedroom, that's also increasing this tension. No dialogue, no voiceover. It's genius, and I think that's why, compared to the book, at this day, barely anyone knows. I was talking to a friend recently. I was like, oh yeah, we're doing this episode talking about like Psycho based on the book. He was like, oh, it's a book. Like, he didn't even think
Right.
about it. It's like, Psycho is just this, it's just Hitchcock's film.
I I think you're spot on. I think the key difference, I think, between the two stories, film and book, is the book. I believe is written by a guy that wants to do true crime podcasts before they were invented, and the film, I
Born
think,
too early.
way too early. But the film, so right from the screenplay and into Hitchcock's hand, the mandate is suspense. And I think the tweaks that you get along the way, the tweaking with um, Norman's character, that he's a little bit more innocent, and just sort of the dissociative disorder and the different personalities that are in there. Um, they're a little bit more mysterious to us than they are in the book. I think, yeah, I think that leads to the generation of suspense, because just this character being a bit of an innocent and a bit, sort of, charming and awkward, as opposed to being, a little bit uncomfortably awkward. I think that sort of works for, generating suspense better, just taking these scenes and stretching them out. And just in terms of, the aggregate edit, how the scenes are strung together, it plays with time, stretches things out. The use of music, the use of
Hmm.
all these tools. I think the mandate in Hitchcock's hand is the generation of suspense. And I think all the choices in the adaptation. I think, Jack, you were saying this, that um, there are a lot of pieces here that come from the script, and it's sort of a masterful job in the adaptation, because it still feels like the book, but there's enough tweaks that it's its own piece. And I think that piece in the piece in cinema is that it's an adventure for the audience, and Hitchcock knows how to connect with them, and what suspense works, because he's had a career of that, and that's how they're different. Yeah.
Just to touch on what Nick said slightly earlier about the book and Hitchcock's adaptation, let's say, I found to buy this book rather difficult. I bought the ebook of it because
Hmm.
it
Same.
was like 13, 12, £13, and it was like delivered from Germany on eBay, and I was like, what? And it's all out of print. There's like £8, £9 for the book used 10, 15 years ago. And I also think that again, it's gone probably into infamy now, Nick. I think it's travelled even further down that road of being it's Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, not Robert Bloch's Psycho. And I think it's another issue that I think we've had this. I think I've had this chat before, either to Carson. I think it's with Carson on Coppercast about the issue where the filmmakers of a certain era, like your Coppolas, your Lucases, your Billy Friedkins, um, they were very much enamored with the literature at the time and read that because TV, film was very much in fruition, or it wasn't highly accessible as it is now, and grew up reading these books and understood the limitations, also the imagination of the adaptation, and they go on to adapt The Exorcist, they go on to adapt George,
Outsiders.
Mark. Yes, yeah. There's a great Coppola with Maripuso stuff, like,
Hmm.
and again, what again? You've got Rumpelfish and all sorts of stuff like that, and like for the outsiders. There's an interesting thing there, and I think what those people did is it's still known as Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. It's always William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist. Famously, it's not Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather. It's Mario Puzo's The Godfather. And I think when you look at this thing like this now, I think if you'd have put, because it's a Hitchcock thing, and there's a tax or a presentive of what a Hitchcock film is, which I'm going to get to in a second with Depiction, is that there's sort of an expectation. And I think you go into a film that's Robert Bloch's Psycho, no one is going to go see that. But the fact it's Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which is probably on, like, I think it's on the cover now of the Blu-ray. I think is slightly demeaning to the original author, Robert Bloch. I don't know how anyone else feels about that. I just think it's like, oh, okay, like, it's just we the classic case of forgetting where these things have come from, and the adaptation then becomes someone else's, and then it can become someone else's, and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
the point being, going to that, is you talked about the opening and spending time with Norman in the book, and then spending time straight away with Marion Crane in the film. I think that is a very clear indication of trust. I think that's two authors on very different sides of the medium having trust in their viewer. I don't think Robert Bloch has a great deal of trust in his reader. I don't say
Yeah.
that disparagingly. I just don't think he's got any time for that. I don't think he's interested. He wants you to know the game. He wants you to know it very quickly. And he wants you to get to a point where you think it's going this one way, and then reveals it. And I think it still works like that. But I just don't think he has much trust. Partly because he knows he wants to take it on one way, and the misdirect is so overt. It's so overt. It's covert. I think Hitchcock has the trust of his viewer and knows that spending all that time with Marion Crane is not only going to immerse the viewer into not knowing where this is going to go, but also understands the technical ability he's got about intensity and atmosphere and tension. And I think Hitchcock's confidence, granted with the whole spew I went on earlier, is that there's a director there who knows his craft inside and out, and knows that I know when to cut this away. I know that casting is going to make that result. I know that this book can be explored to an inch of its life in this scene, but then condensed here. And I can open this up with a volume of filmmaking, a bit of availability of editing, and just have this long, anguishing set of inside the car, inside narration, and then having no narration whatsoever, and having a pick one car up, then another, then another. Very trivial things in a book, which is also very trivial in the film, but it sort of has this long-lasting effect of, um, again, being so overt covert about diluting the viewer on one certain track, and then bang, taking them away straight away. I just think it's an idea of probably two people at a spectrum of understanding that they're understanding the limitations of what they expect from their viewer. I don't think, or reader should say, or spectator. I don't think Robert Bloch is doing it in a disparaging way, or an ignorance way. I just think he's a very pulp type writer in this, and wants to get to the nitty grittiness of being nasty with Norman Bates. I think there's an interesting. You talk about the whole thing about anatomy of adaptation. I think the opening thing is probably killer or keen to this whole thing. This film, having opened with Norman Bates, setting the precedent, then going back to Marion Crane, jump and start, stop and start, it's too,
Yeah, that
the flow, the rhythm,
that would have been the
it's
tradition of the time. So I think you're probably right
yes,
to say that, you know, Hitchcock sees, you know what, my audience will get it. And this is a function of suspense that we transition from Marion Crane to the mystery around the Bates Hotel and Norman, and that'll work. And he trusts
Hmm.
that
yeah,
his audience will be along for the ride because he knows the beats.
yeah. And it's also due to the fact that he needs to make Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates so uninspired and a part of the furniture, if you will. And I think the fact that we find him at the hotel and have no knowledge of him also clues up to the fact of yeah, Psycho is the name, but Psycho is a word of description that could be very many things in this book or this film. And the fact that we know Marion Crane's on this journey and we go to this hotel. I don't think Anthony Perkins. I think he's been he's friends with Orson Welles at this stage, and I think he's been in a few films. But that could be a bit part play for 5 minutes. She leaves the hotel, goes somewhere else. I think it really works in the study of we don't know what's going on, and it comes as a shock. He's a peeper, he's a creep, and then it develops into this thing. I think if he sets the precedent with the book, and we start with Norman Bates as a fat, decrepit, horrible, strange person, I just think he gives the game away far too early. And where's the tension? Where's the fun in that?
Yeah.
Where's the real of that audience? Where's the real of that viewer to make it nasty? And I like the idea that Hitchcock goes that far into this.
Yeah. No, totally, totally. And I also like how he ends it. Um, I think not so much because he leaves viewers with a last scare, not even scared, just really deeply unsettled. I think the last push in on Norman Bates and the voiceover of the mother personality has completely taken over. It's very creepy. I always forget how uncanny the superimposed skull is. In my mind, it's always much more blatantly obvious. Instead, it lasts just long enough and it's opaque just enough to make it noticeable without it being crystal clear, without it feeling like a cheap effect. Really disturbing. Um, but the final shot is not that. The final shot is Marion's car with her corpse being pulled from
Hmm.
the swamp. And I really like that at the end of it, again, it's not like in the Robert Bloch film, a novel where he's obsessed with the psychopath and the reasons and why is he doing it. We start with him, we close with him. Hitchcock and the screenwriter, go the opposite direction. They are more interested in the tragedy of it all in the end, and just the promise of a bright future that this woman could have had, a lovely relationship with the partner with Sam, because you see him, he's a nice guy. He's not perfect, he's not great, he's nice enough. I think she also mentions it. She's like, oh, I'm 27 years old, 28, I'm not married yet. I'm gonna keep this guy close because I don't think I'm gonna have many other guys like him in the future. He's all right. He'll work out. I don't think Sam is a great character by design, and I kind of love that. It's just kind of like there. But I do love that they finished the film on that shot of the car being pulled back, and just a reminder of how it all started in a way. Just this tragedy, this horror, which is a nice little note to end a masterpiece on.
I'm going to come in with a left hook here.
Oh
I
gosh.
don't. When this is the problem with this club we do here. This is the problem with this adaptation. It's the problem with the podcast you wrote me in. If I hadn't read the book, I would probably agree with you. But I quite like, again, that's why I mentioned earlier about the book ending being the best and worst thing about it. There is a horrible, insipid nature to the ending of that book, in that everybody is talking about him. They don't really know what they're talking about. I think psychiatric care is not there. Mental illness care is not there. His mind is eradicated of natural self, and his mother's taken over, and a schizophrenic, morbid reality of never moving again to prove to everyone else that she wouldn't harm a fly. It's horrifying. It's horrifying that someone's going to sit there for the next 20, 30, 40 years of their life in a mental institution in the middle of fucking nowhere with very little care provided aside from very much what you said about the Halloween thing with the 2018 reboot. Just a man being poked and prodded for notoriety, but nobody wants to know the fact. No one wants to know why he was like that. They just want to know why he did it. And there's a difficulty of finding those answers.
Mm-hmm.
The book, I think, again, that's the power of that, in that there's a slight edge of ambiguity to it, but in a sense of predictability, in that we know that that man's never going to get a cure. And there's a sort of this like downtrodden, heartfelt, almost sort of gut wrenching thing. However, the twist there in its own right is that this man is horrifying. So it sort of just about works, but not enough for me because of the depiction. The film, yes, the superimpose of the skull I think is impressive, but granted, I think you've got that's the difficulty of its time, isn't it? I agree with you. I think there's the Mandela effect of just you probably look at that in a more horrifying note because you understand the reality of it, and I think that's a power to the actual material itself. But the going to find the body or pulling the car out to me is just like, why not leave that slight ambiguity of that sometimes when you get scars, the wounds sometimes they don't heal. They're always on
Hmm.
show, and there's always that thing about life in that you don't get finality to a lot of things in life, and especially in terms of these murder cases, which granted I've got no qualifications, nor do most people have those podcasts. But that's another conversation entirely.
Yeah.
Uh, there's this, and we'll get from there. I've had this conversation with my wife multiple times. She hates me for it, but it really does frustrate me when you've got like people making money out of that and just like talking about it like it's just the Daily Mail tabloid. Anyway. I'll
A
move on
full
from that. I don't wanna-
exploitation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yes. However, you could then provoke Robert Bloch's thing about a guy, and it's another conversation. But there's this lack of finality and truth with these things that happen because you're not there. Nobody is there aside from the perpetrator and the victim. And often enough, there's only one person who leaves to tell that story, and it's the perpetrator who then wants that discourse of infamy and longevity. And like Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, they've gone to the graves not telling that where that final body is. Why? Because that story will always be told. That story of not knowing where that body is. And I'm sure it will be found one day. I hope to God it is that family so they can have some peace. But that mother will never know where that child is. That mother will as perhaps maybe have even died, not knowing where a child is buried. There's an evil sickness to that, a truly horrifying notion to behold that someone could be that evil to withstand those uh, those conversations, to have that, to give peace to those people and truth for these people. It's not they're not interested in it. They can't comprehend or compartmentalize their actions. And I think the book does a brilliant job of showcasing that Norman Bates is gone. Norman Bates was gone a long, long time ago, but that is the final straw.
Hmm.
Whatever young boy, whatever young man, and hopefulness of just wanting to please his mother, of how distorted and betrayed and disfigured, both psychologically and literally, that boy is gone. And I think there's a really bitterness to swallow the ending of that book. Whereas the film is like, oh yeah, but we found the body though, we found the money, case closed. I think there needs to be a bitterness there. I think, but again, I think that's the issue with the censors. It's
Mm.
it's like the James Cagney in The Public Enemy or White Heat. He's got to die. He can't be seen living. He's got to go out. And it's got to be his own fault. And I think that's the issue you've got there. I think, unfortunately, I think it's a product of time its own right. And does it work? Of course it does. It's not a massive 4 star. It doesn't drop the rating down at all. It's not like it
It
ruins
was
it.
terrible.
Yeah,
Everything that came
it's
before.
not
I
like yeah,
I can
throw it
honestly
out the
say I
window.
have never thought about that last shot of pulling the car out and whether or not it should
It's too on the
go or not.
nose.
So yeah, I'm just sort of captivated listening to both your perspectives. Um, I
I
think
mean, they're gonna find the bodies. They do say they're like, oh yeah, they buried it in the swamp. Like
yeah, and if you
they
sort of
find out from the interview.
yeah,
Yeah, but we don't need the realization of that, do we? It's. I'm just trying to think of like another infamous horror film, like again, like The Exorcist or The Shining. Granted, they're two very different works by two very different creatives, but when you look at The Shining, the ambiguity of that works so much more, and even The Exorcist to some
mm,
extent. There's an ambiguity to Father Karras there at the end.
this could be just sort
There
of the
has to be,
maturity of the genre too, right? Like the era
yeah,
that
of
it
course,
comes out. Yeah,
yeah,
and I
and of
think you're
course, I
right.
think
Say
there's
this,
also
the closure is a
yeah, there's
function of the
also
era.
yeah, and I also think there's the depiction as well of what you can get away with in the 70s, and there's a bit more in the 80s as well. But with the slasher. But don't get me wrong, like you go back to Halloween 1978. There's a marvelness about not knowing what the hell that is.
Mhm.
That's a human being, or is it? Like what's
Yeah,
taken? What drives that person? And I think gets it, and then, not. I don't think the two overly connected of sorts, but I think that, you've got to have one or the other, and that might be me being like bitter, nasty late 20-year-old morbid who's had a pretty bad
Cynical.
week. Yeah, cynical bad week at work, but I do think that the two of them don't coexist particularly well in the context of reading the book and watching the film. I
I
think
can
it's the
see
one thing
that.
where, but then again, the book and the film are quite dark to consider the actions undertaken. There has to be sort of like lightness to it, perhaps. Maybe there's a little bit of finding balance between that.
Mm.
That might be a form of what Hitchcock finds.
Like,
Mhm.
But
I'm thinking about it in two ways. Now, even just hearing you two talk about this, I don't want to make a bold statement. Proper historians probably know better than I do, and I can't think of anything. But this feels the ending of the film feels almost like a prototype of so many other horror films to come, because you mentioned, especially when you were talking about James Cagney, I was thinking about all those movies, the gangster films from the era, even some movies by Hitchcock. They end when the killer is caught.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's even like literally the last shot. It's like, and the killer is caught, or he's lying dead in the street, like, and that's it. And there is this element, like even rewatching it, knowing the movie keeps going on. There is this moment where it's almost like a moving painting with Sam, stopping Norma slash Norman from killing Lila, and it's just like this wide shot, and it could have easily been, oh my god, twist, shock, reveal, the end, and
Mhm.
it's like it was him all along. Oh, and you just leave the cinema. Would it still work? Maybe, but by having this extra 10-ish minutes, I'm not a big fan of just how long the conversation is with the psychiatrist. um but by having those long extra 10 minutes, and then oh, can I just give him the blanket? He was asking for this help. Oh yeah, give him. It's fine. Keep him warm. And the camera tracks there always. It leaves you with this feeling of dread. I don't really want to say there is finality or closure per se. Um, it's just so dark. It feels like a prelude to the darkness of the late '60s of cinema when you go into the new Hollywood thing of just like, no, we're not going to leave you with the evil has been beaten. Norman is gone, as you two have said. Like Norman is far gone. This is just Norma. It's a tragic figure. I think in a way that it really isn't in the book. In the book, by portraying him, I don't know if it's fat phobia or things like that, but by portraying him physically nastier, there is this intent of not making you relate to him, but while having Anthony Perkins, this bright boy, as the protagonist, you do feel a bit sorry. Like I get to the end, and I'm like, this sucks. Like of course, it sucks for the people who died. First of all, Marion and Arbogast and whoever else was killed before. Um, but it just feels sad. It's like he's far gone, and
I'm
it's
In
tragic. And the reminder of the car as well of what happened because of this insanity,
Yeah, because how's
harming
the
I'm
someone.
the book ends up weird. What is it like in? That's not the book. Where's the book? Book's on my phone.
It was
Uh,
a different book.
a different book. The um, shoot, you guys continue. There's because there's something in the book, just in the very end, that um doesn't acknowledge. So Jack's point, totally well taken. Maybe it is a little better to be ambiguous, but I would say that Psycho has to happen in order to open doors for other filmmakers to explore ambiguity, right? So,
Yeah.
and like this is one film, and then just wait for 10 years, right? And you get all kinds of ambiguous things start happening. You get black is white, white is black. You have anti-heroes, right at this era in the late 50s and the 60s. Good guys are good, bad guys are bad. And this is sort of weird to see this female character Marion like steal money. That's weird. It's weird to see a toilet on screen. Like there's like, so this is very door opening in a lot of ways. Um, but at the same time, it's still okay that there's that piece of the closure, which does sort of acknowledge, I guess, how we started the first half of the film in a way that the book doesn't. And another thing that this film is probably doing, which is cutting edge, is giving a glimpse at least some sort of understanding of psychology. It's very basic here, but it tries to explain, in the terms of the day, how it understands the behavior, how it understands disorder. And that's something that, it's sort of basic 1960s understanding of, mental health disorders and psychosis and, these types of legitimate issues, right? Like, disconnect and, how trauma can impact a person. This is a film that at least is trying to understand it, which I think is comes from Bloch ultimately, and just the way he wants to sort of dig into the true crime and, well, how did this actually happen? But um, yeah, so it's interesting. I think this film leads to sort of, what other filmmakers will do later, and one of those pieces is, bringing, a piece of ambiguity, and I'd never really thought of that final shot with the trunk in this type of depth before. It's great talk, guys.
I, I, I have the answer.
That's why we're
It's slightly
here.
long, it's slightly winding, but there's a reality in the social paradigm of the United States of this. In the 40s, the cinema booms. Everyone goes to the cinema too because it's cheap as chips. You've got your Casablanca, you've got your Maltese Falcon, then the war happens. And then people go off to fight because they fight a common enemy of someone who believes that they are better than someone else. And they're causing a genocide. And then those people come back and everything is sort of hunky dory. And it then takes a generational gap then to then start questioning of like, my mom and dad don't talk to each other anymore. My dad can't hold down a job. My dad went to fight the Japanese and the Germans and won't give me a hug anymore. And I think it's generational trauma that when you get to those people who were born in the baby booms, the late 40s or mid 40s, these soldiers coming back. I think then in the 50s, you've got these kids who get raised up. Then they come out and these kids get to probably enter the adolescence of the 60s. And what happens? You then have a Cold War. You have Castro that rises up. You have Joseph Stalin. You have conversations about, well, we don't like you because you want to share your stuff. They're against socialism. There's this whole thing about, well, again, you have like Cuba starts to rise up. And then in the 60s, you've got the Bay of Pigs. You've got why are we invading a country? Then you've got, again, communism rises up. You've got the McCarthyism. You have internal politics. In the 60s, you've got JFK is killed by a lone gunman, allegedly. That's what they say. I don't know. I don't know who. I don't know.
This is
But then
very
you've got
long-winded. I'm curious what
yeah,
you.
no, but I'll get there. Don't worry. But then you've got
Okay.
then two or few years later, Martin Luther King is killed, Malcolm X is killed, and you have Robert F. Kennedy then is killed. You have people who are talking and fighting up for individualism, or the masses who are individuals, who are then silenced by people that always go back to a certain government agency. You have then issues where you're going to Vietnam to fight a war against communism, you don't win. You have them people then coming back, a generation of those who grew up in the 40s and 50s. America changes its whole conversation about the good neighbor out, next door. Suburbs are on a rise in the 50s and 60s to house the GIs. There's a lot about internal politics in America that Psycho arises from, in the fact that I think it'd be quite difficult in 1957 to listen on the radio that a man has been found in Texas skinning women and trying to make a woman out of it to resemble his mother, and they've found lampshades with skin, knife and forks of skin. I don't think the casual American would probably believe that to reality. Fast forward 10 years later, the President of the United States has been shot, killed, his brother has been murdered, two black rights activists have been killed and never culprits have been caught. There's a 10-year gap there of finding out that your neighbor is not who you think he is, and then you have an issue with authority. And I think this book is in between the two of those. In that there's an issue there about local law enforcement, about local people, and the fact that the your neighbors who are all very quiet, have all their own little lives. There's always something going on. There's always some darker stuff, and that became somewhat of a reality. And granted, yeah, it's a bit of a shift to get to the JFK stuff, but in the context of, I think, a country dramatically changes its shape. In that, I think that paranoia, I think that mental illness, I think that all these things blossom with a slight lack of a word and become more mainstream, but don't want to be discussed. And then individualism and having a voice doesn't want to be discussed. I think the again or again thing is a it's also bastardizing the fact of a man who was clearly very ill, who has been commonized, or let's say not politicalized, but um, uh, I don't what's the word to describe this. Someone who's been like mainstreamed into like this infamy about this man who did this and did that, and I think no one wants to talk about what led him to do that, what would possess him to do that, what are the reasons, what was his family like, why would he do that, why would someone go and murder these other people who are fighting for other people? They don't. America's not interested in finding out the problems or solutions. It just wants to maintain structure. I think, granted, this is the world in general. It's not just an American thing. But Psycho comes at a really pivotal time in about that. About I think Robert Bloch is really investigating that America is changing, and local law enforcement now are not worth a shite. They cannot stop these things. Police turn up when the murder is finished, and all it is now is to catch the person before they do it again. And I think that's a hysteria uh, throughout the work of serial killers, but it's also Robert Bloch's interest in Jack the Ripper, in
Hmm.
that the police were always second to it, never were interested, couldn't ever get them down, couldn't ever get to crimes because of the issues of the welfare and the state at the time, and also the internal politics. I think it's still here. I think the themes are very much about Robert Bloch just doesn't put much interest in the fact that the people who are meant to save you out there are not really interested to help. And I think that people who are genuine are not very genuine, and people who you don't think are very genuine end up like Abagast to turn out to want to end up to doing the right thing. It's all an interesting concoction about America turning on its head. That's the long-winded answer, I think. And I think it just comes at that time where things, the youth is taken out of America at that point. I think in the 1960s, I think it's decapitated. It's taken away. Freedom of expression. It just gets taken away. And I think Robert Bloch's novel at that time.
I'd agree with that. I think it's an early glimpse at conversations to come. Very much
Yeah,
so.
and
A changing time. I did find so.
uh,
I'll just sort of
the
go.
final quote, you found
Yeah,
it.
I'll go back to
Go
this
for it.
one. Sorry. It's at the very end of the second last chapter, and it's after the conversation, the psychological discussion, and we've got Mary here. I can't even hate Bates for what he did. He must have suffered more than any of us. In a way, I can almost understand. Sam rose and she walked him to the door. Anyway, it's over. I'm going to try to forget it. Just forget everything that happened. So this here is, I think, in uh, direct conflict with Nicolo's take on, there was a tragedy here, right? Because what I'm reading is from
In the
the,
film version, I
in
mean,
the film
at least.
version. Yeah, because what I'm reading here from the second last chapter of the book is the sister of the murder victim who's saying, anyway, it's over and I'm going to try to forget about it. And the film addresses the humanity a little bit more. So this maybe even just sort of emphasizes to me that blocks about the crime, right? Like this investigative journalistic look at a crime and explanation thereof. And it's all fine, but it's two different
Yeah.
outlooks on the same story, because Block does not does not leave this with emotional care for these characters at all, really.
Yeah, and to kind of close it off with also what Jack was saying is that one of the key parts of the Jack the Ripper murders was not so much just he murdered people, but he was targeting sex workers,
Hmm.
prostitutes in Whitechapel. And in here, we don't have rich posh wife or whoever. We have struggling single woman who's in a sexually active non-marital relationship, which for 1959 was not
Pretty
was not
risque.
class, was very risque, correct. And she's the one who gets the boot. And so I think, and I think it's something that kind of speaks not so much to the story itself, because the story itself works and I find it very powerful in that
Nick,
sense of who the victims are, but it speaks to the privilege probably of Bloch and even Hitchcock, who didn't really think too much about that social element, maybe.
the one thing about that which is also interesting is that opening with Mary Crane. opposes the relationship she had with her parents, where she sacrificed her youth to
Hmm.
care for her mom and dad, or I think for her parents, or especially for her mom, and then had to raise a sister. When then you preoppose that against Norman Bates, who also is essentially doing the same thing. Those opposing things. It's also an interesting one that she gets the boot there.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
she's
very
motivating him,
interesting.
like she's pushing him, and that's also something that triggers him. She's like, "Why don't you leave this like your mother? Like, tell her to fuck off."
Yeah, but I think that she's also doing now against her sister as well. Like it's an interesting thing about, yeah, very 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 interesting.
Yeah. But also, we don't have that much time left, and we still have something to talk about, so we can go very quickly on it because I'm dreading I'm dreading what Jack is going to say
Oh, well, I
uh,
won't be long on that.
about it. But of course, it is infamous. We were talking about the infamy of Norman Bates and Jack the Ripper. There is something just as infamous as them, which is the fact that Psycho was remade. Something that is considered a joke at this point. But in 1998, Universal was looking after making three different sequels to Psycho, including a prequel sequel with Psycho 4, The Beginning. Um, they were
Of the
looking
end.
for they had stash of remakes, things they could remake, and they approached, of course, Gus Van Sant, who was coming hot off the making of Good Will Hunting, and they just told them, oh yeah, this is something I've been meaning to do for a long time, like a remake of Psycho. But the twist is that it's going to be shot for shot. I'm going to barely change anything in here, which scared them off strongly, but then they still gave him the money to do it. I can go first, honestly, on this one. I had seen this movie, I don't even remember, like probably 10 or more years ago, and it didn't really leave any impression outside of being wowed by the cast, because it is an admittedly impressive cast for this project. You have, of course, Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, Anne Eke as Marion, Julian Moore as Lila Crane, Viggo Mortensen, William H. Macy, Philip Baker Hall, like Flea has a cameo in this film, which I forgot about. Um, and I can respect what Gus Van Sant was going for. First of all, being like, okay, if someone is going to remake it, I'd rather it be me than anyone else, so I can be truthful to the source material. I also respect the exercise of trying to be kind of meta in a way, and I know Jack will talk about this aspect of intentionally making something shot for shot, showing the futility of it. We're just gonna make it in color. That's the big upgrade. Does it actually change anything? Does it make it different from Hitchcock's film, because it's essentially the same film, the same screenplay, literally? All those little elements, I can respect them. I just wish the movie was better. I don't think the casting, either the actors are miscast or they're just poorly directed, because I think there's none of the subtlety present in the original film, and not in a way that feels like, oh, it's intentionally campy. No, it feels like everyone is on different levels in this movie. You can tell Vince Vaughn was scared shitless trying to play Norman Bates. um, and I think all of the moments of death are really poorly made. Like, the editing is choppy, it has no impact. There are strange cutaways that are not, they feel intentionally made to piss people off, but not in a way that I can respect. I love provocative directors, I love bold choices, and I was watching it knowing all those things, and I was just thinking, this just kind of sucks. And it was surreal watching it after having seen the original again, because of how close it is, and at the same time it's just wrong. Again, by design, maybe, but also probably not. I'm curious, Randy, what are your opinions on
Yeah,
Gus
I
Van
think
Sant's
honestly, I
remake?
think the casting happened fairly easily because the casting director was hanging out at the Boogie Nights premiere and just got half of that cast.
Well, they were
Uh,
getting ready for
They're
Magnolia,
getting ready
right?
for Magnolia. Yeah, hey, do you want to just come over here for a few days' work? Because what, the three or four of them, I think. But at any rate, my response to that film, and I saw that in theaters back in the day. I'm sort of with you. Like, weirdly, it's for something that's shot for shot based on one of the finest Hollywood films ever made, or the most impactful, you could say, one of the most storied, legendary films. A shot for shot remake, it doesn't stick with you. Like, so I watched this last weekend, and it's fine. I'm enjoying it, to a point because the craft is there, but there's
Hmm.
something about it that it just doesn't really fit. And like you, I appreciate the experiment. I like Gus Van Sant, and I appreciate maybe some of the ideas that he has here, like because ultimately what he has here is an art piece that asks you to consider, okay, why was the other one great? Because here is the same thing, but the context is different. The only thing different really is context. So content and context. So it brings a conversation around that, but it does, like, the Psycho we've been talking about for the last hour and a half on film, it's very much of its time in a way. Like it's ahead of its
Right.
time in a lot of ways, but it's still a film of the time, like I was saying, like filmmakers in the 60s, like they were making a film, like it was about movie magic, and it's something that's, heightened and exceptional, and all these things. And it was just, it was after the French New Wave and the English New Wave and the Hollywood new guns that come out that sort of break down and wear down the proscenium wall, where you get this more gritty realism that comes with, how actors act. I think there's an influx of Broadway actors that really know how to, act differently and bring a depth to characters in the 70s that we don't get in the 60s. So so there is something that I take, if this is the conversation that Gus Van Sant wants to have about content and context. The context feels weird. Like I've got these 1990s presences. Like Julianne Moore is a strong known actress of the time. William H. Macy is a couple years after his Oscar nomination, and career height, I'm going to say. And he just feels sort of weird in here to me, right? Like he's sort of adjacent to his comic mode. Like he's not, full on grit. He's
Yeah.
like he feels, like the character from Fargo without doing the accent. Like he's got a peculiar presence in this. Like I gotta say, Vince Vaughn, I think he's all right. He's all right, but he's got a peculiar presence. Anne Heche, peculiar presence. James Remar is sort of cool to show up. But the whole thing just, it doesn't really stick to the bones in my mind, and like it doesn't offend me, but I am still left with, really, why is that a thing? Like it's a weird project, but I don't know, the reinvention in this style, it doesn't do anything except it sits there like an art exhibit, something to look at. This was done. And maybe there's a genius to that, but in terms of letting this film sort of wash over me, it's fine. And it does have a lot of sort of the magical beats that, were crafted by Hitchcock, and all those tools from the toolkit, but there's something that doesn't resonate. So if this is the question that Gus Van Sant was, well, let the audience figure out, how this fits. How would Psycho look today, and does that style of filmmaking work today? Um, Not straight up, no. Like I think maybe we learn from the techniques, and we pull the techniques and use them in other places, and just insofar as cinema is growing and always ever evolving. Why are we going back a couple evolutionary jumps? Um, you know, it's weird. I'll just leave it at that. Like it doesn't offend me. I don't mind watching it, but everything just sort of sits a little bit weird. It's like there's
Yeah.
a number of ingredients are wrong in the lasagna, but it still tastes okay, but it's not a meal I'll remember.
I like that. I will only add like two more things about that before going into Jack's thoughts. That I'm not a fan of Christopher Doyle's cinematography here, which might sound blasphemous, I don't know, but I really love him generally speaking. But there's something about the way they just put, and not even just the cinematography, it's just like set design, costume design. Everything is so busy.
Hmm.
Just recently, like I was looking back at some shots also from like Rear Window, which is a color film that Hitchcock made in 1954, and it looks stunning. There's so much careful control of the sets, of the costumes. It's completely missing in this film. It's just crowded. Every shot, I'm just, they go into the parlor and her dress is attracting a lot of attention, but also the birds in the background are lit in a strange way. Just the shower curtain they chose. bizarre, which I get it. Like I was watching a behind the scenes documentary. It's like, oh yeah, you can create some nice visual effects, but it's so distracting. It's taken away from the horror of the moment as well. Just baffling. And the last thing I will say, I don't think Gus Van Sant has even read the novel. Which is why I was like, this is just a curio, and I wanted to have like a very brief conversation about this film, but it doesn't. It feels like he just cared about, understandably so, the remake.
Hmm.
I think Vince Vaughn is probably like more novel accurate because he's just chubbier than Anthony Perkins ever was. He has more body weight, and that's it. But yes, I'm curious, Jack, because I know you are a big fan of this film, right?
Before we disagree, I'll agree. I think you're right. I think Gus Van Sant is not interested in the novel. He's interested in Hitchcock's approach to this, which is the positive and negative that you can discuss that happen. I really like this film, but not for the not perhaps for the context in that I think a lot of people would presume so. I think this is actually quite an interesting art piece about at least a conversation on authorship, depiction, um, limitation. I mean, everything that this film does, it opposes Hitchcock's in a way, in a sense of filmmaking skill, or not even skill, but what's achievable is that he can film in color because he can get away with the blood now. He
Mhm.
can also showcase Norman Bates jacking off because he couldn't do that in
Yeah,
Hitchcock's film.
yeah,
I think
he goes there.
yeah,
He goes there.
he goes there, and I think there's also this depiction of like of the if, at least in the 90s of the times, bringing in players that can fit straight in. Why are those performances so different with the exact same conversations, the same dialogue, the same language? What makes this film so abstractly different when I go side by side from it? And there's always these interesting factors into those questions about, well, what makes the two different? Is it Hitchcock's limitation and expertise against Gus Van Sant's 90s approach to it? I think it's such an interesting boiling point of discussion. But I think mostly it's just about perhaps a really strange, what Randy was alluding to, or knocking on the head, basically just this art piece to deduct or deduce, should I say, the nature of the power of Alfred Hitchcock in that is that an auteur film? Is that Alfred Hitchcock behind the camera orchestrating all this, or is it the amalgamation of everyone else together? Because when you look at Gus Van Sant's film, obviously the lack of Hitchcock, it's very much on the nose. Everything it's basically the same. The one thing Gus Van Sant didn't do, which would far more prove his point, was shoot and release this in black and white. I think Universal balked at the idea that he wanted to remake it or at least touch it, and then the conversation went so long, and they thought they could get a profit, and then it was like, well, we can't shoot this in black and white though. No chance, no chance, no chance. Got to be in color. I think if it was shot in black and white, you would have a far better um, piece of two pieces of, let's say, entertainment or art that could go against each other and look at the difference in 30 years between what an audience will accept, what they won't accept, um, nature of the beast, nature of Norman Bates, has it changed? I think it's all those conversations come across about what audiences have got to have a conversation between the two. I just think the discourse is just really interesting. I think that the 90s audience look at that Psycho, if it was shot black and white, um, scene for shot for shot, there's nothing really to deduce aside from how we look at the thematics and the conversation arises once again. Is it different from the 1960s? And then we look at, well, if it's shot the same, why do we not feel the same? Can you lay the hands at Gus Van Sant? Is it the cinematographer then? How far do we put the merits of the authorship? Is it Alfred Hitchcock who sails that ship alone? Does Gus Van Sant then have to sail the ship of this alone? There's all these really interesting conversations. Perhaps they are conscious conversations that Gus Van Sant's trying to approach. Is it also just side effects of him just not wanting to really touch the material, but also have a go at trying to replicate something and just trying to have a spin on it? I'm not too sure. You'd have to ask him, but I just think there's really interesting conversations that lead from this. And the one I got most, like, if I watched it again, it perhaps would change in the conversation we just had now, or at least the spiel of Unleashed. I do think there's an interesting dynamic about half how far an audience want to approach the size of an auteur. Just because it has Hitchcock's name on the bill, does that mean that this film is therefore elevated if someone came along and did the exact same thing with a different cast and used the same shots but also increased it? How do we look on that by a director who's an Academy Award winner?
Mm-hmm.
There's just that's a fascinating dynamic to behold, and one in the article I tried to uncover. I don't think I even got an answer there, to be fair, probably because it's I just think it's so much to discuss there. And I do think that just listening to you two, and not to unravel a master, no, I would say a mass debate then, but a debate, let's say.
It's on your mind.
Yeah, it's a slip there. Just thinking about Vince Vaughn and
Yeah, carry on, Mr. Bates.
Jacking it.
yeah, just carry on. Yeah, I'll carry on. Yeah, move on. I was going to a Jak-Luke territory then, so I'm
Master
waiting for the
Bates.
soundboard. I was waiting for the soundboard. But I just think it's an interesting conversation to have. How you pick Gus Van Sant against Hitchcock. The two are incredibly informed, accomplished, and acclaimed directors. Yet look at a project 30 years apart, or at least 38 years apart. If we're going to go back to the novel, it's probably bang on, but it's a fascinating conversation to have,
Mm-hmm.
because when I look at both of them put together, I can't quite knock Gus Van Sant for trying to put you in a pigeonhole and think, well, you can't blame me, so it's therefore a response to an audience. And I think how an audience then responds to that is quite telling, because I don't think, and not to shit on both of your arguments here, I don't think you can go into this with both those responses about it's flat or it's uninspired, it doesn't hold any weight. Granted, once you've seen the film and you've got the black and white taste to it, and there's a texture that's lacking there in a positive way, you've got that. We've read the book. Granted, if you've seen the film before, that book is sort of irrelevant in this debate, but once you've seen the hard-earned piece of Psycho, it is also then difficult to get that second punch because you're watching the same thing. But again, not to reiterate, but just watching the same thing from that dynamic of a 1998, a Gus Van Sant, an indie darling, with the same type of score. I just think you would probably call that a troll now, and I think that's a determined to have an actual conversation on art.
What's the word you said you would call it? Wrong?
A troll, like a troll. It's a troll film. Like
okay. Sorry.
It's a piss take. Like it's someone like mimicking or making less of the artistic embrace of the Hitchcock film. I don't think that's the identity here. I don't think that's the ideal. I don't think he's purposely gone into this and thinking, I'll sink the ship, I'll bring Universal down with me, and I'll destroy my career for about 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. I don't think that's the intention. I think it's someone who has got the opportunity to do something which is very avant-garde to its time, very Godard, it's very French New Wave, in that you're taking the exact same material, putting a 98 spin on it, with a cast that are almost like for like in a sense, not particularly. Well, I'll go there. I think they're right for the parts. I think they're right for the time. Against type, I think Anna Hetch is just coming off 7 Days, 7 Nights. She's going to storm into a big career. Then she reveals to the world that she's gay, and the career gets destroyed because of that. And you've got the Julianne Moore who's coming into like true fruition in the late 90s and 70s after Boogie Nights, 70s and the 2000s. Sorry, William H. Macy with Fargo. There's all these directors coming off really great 90s film. Great 90s films. Vaughn with Swingers. I just think it's the right time, and I think it depends on how the audience then intercept that. It's also an audience that going back. This is where I'll end this. I'm going on here. But going back to my point about America changing, this is also after the Afghanistan invasion. It's also with Kuwait. 9/11's fucking just on the cusp. There's a different era of people watching that film and looking at The Neighbour and looking at those stories. The internet hasn't quite blossomed yet, but Rupert Murdoch's news agency has just boomed the world. Princess Diana's I'm going to say on the way out there. That's quite poor taste myself, but the monarchy's losing grasp. Let's say the things are changing radically. The newspapers are hounding every fucker available. Michael Jackson's in the news constantly for things he shouldn't probably be doing. Allegedly, there's a lot going on there that's now in the face of the world. The next door neighbour putting up his grandma and wearing her on a Sunday afternoon, eating his own tea. It's nothing. It's nothing. What's next? What's the biggest thing then? Bill Clinton got a blowjob in the Oval Office. It's like it's not about the neighbour anymore in the 90s. I'm not right wing at all. I know I've heard a lot of left wing leaning things there, but it's Watergate, a president's been impeached. The world has changed now, and granted, the neighbour of the next door neighbour, the suburbs, I think that's gone. The whole ideal of what are they doing? What are they doing? Barbara, they're making noise, they're having sex, they're not even married. That type of 1950s, 60s sentimentality is gone. They're not next door. They're not like they're snorting blow. Like they're listening to the Rolling Stones, devil music, And then when 98, you've got cinema has changed, music has changed. You've got Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, grunge, Nirvana. You've got Kurt Cobain. You've got wars on screen now. You've got it's just a total different environment.
24/7 news.
Yes, yeah. Fox News is in its heyday. Things have changed there. I don't think the film hits a deeper, darker current than the thing did. But that's all in my article. It's probably a bit more now, having set on the film a lot more and having this chat. But I just think the response to that's different. It'd be interesting if Psycho was a 1930s film from Fritz Lang, and Hitchcock made a remake of that in the 60s, because then you could have a really interesting conversation about what's happening now, but with a lack of social media, about how German expressionism, with the rise of the Third Reich and Nazism in Germany, to do with Psycho, with someone with Norman Gaytrick, who lives in Berlin, who's doing these things, or on the outskirts of Stuttgart or Munich or Dusseldorf, and then you look at Psycho with Hitchcock's being a remake. That's what I think the approach is trying to look at. But I think that the rise of other things have just taken it to a different step, and I think it just becomes a little bit egotistical in a sense of that's easy to dominate to look at. It's Gus Van Sant stuff of his own art, which is fair enough because you could have done anything else. But it's burn someone else's money, why don't you? Don't do your own. But that's where I come at. I think it's a really interesting experiment, but perhaps maybe the wrong era. I think if you would go back and if a different world, Psycho's the actual remake, I think we get an interesting conversation about two different distinctive parts of culture and life. And I think Gus Van Sant's film does that. I just think it's marred with a lot of other things that are just strange. Shoot it in black and white. Make it so obvious. Make it so over its covert. Go from Robert Bloch's.
I wonder if someone has made like a fan edit in black and white. It's not going to change anything because the set design, of course, and costumes, blah 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 blah. It's not made for black and white. I wonder if that would change something.
Probably not. But then again, that probably alludes to the fact of Psycho being a far better piece of work, because Hitchcock understands shadow, understands lighting, understands monochrome, whereas Gus Van Sant in a Technicolor world of the 90s boom, it's color.
And Christopher Doyle even, I don't think, has ever shot a full film in black and white. He has shot sequences, but
that's the biggest misstep in the film, undoubtedly. Or at least have the opening in black and white, and then when Julianne Moore's character introduced, bring it into color. Have something a little bit more avant-garde there.
I don't know about that.
I think this is part of the discussion. Is this is what it would look like? Take Hitchcock's craft in the current times of '98. Then it's going to be shot in color, when you don't have to worry about, because it was shot in black and white in part so that Hitchcock could get away with some blood. I think it is. It's the content versus context, and this exact conversation is exactly
very
why
briefly
Van Sant wanted the film to exist, I suppose.
True.
Very briefly though, that point, it's ultimately deafening to what you put to above just said. Though, if that was Tarantino, that would be intercontextuality. It would be a homage. That's a slight difference. It would be. I'm telling you now, if he had done that and it would have been a Tarantinoism, it would have been lauded for being, that's quite cool. He immerses you into an aspect, then bang, he brings color into it, and it's a different world. We're in an MTV world. Oh my God, MTV, Rolling Stone, 5-star. It would totally change the dynamic because of one tiny thing. And I think that's probably where the edit is. Have the opening, have the shower. As soon as the knife goes in, cut to color. We're in an MTV world now. You know, Mom and Dad, Stones are on television. We can, the Beatles, they're in Sergeant Pepper's land now. They ain't on the Hollywood Bowl. These guys are smoking whatever they do in India. It's a totally different world. If that sentimentality was brought with that film, you would have an idea of intercontextuality that would elevate the material. But I just don't think Gus Van Sant either there or that, or again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But if that was a Tarantinoism, I'm telling you now, it would have been lauded. It would have been absolutely through the roof.
Yeah, it would have
Fair
been
enough.
What?
way different though. Like this is not like as we're talking, I'm more convinced this is an art piece. This is a meta art piece. This is not an homage. This is to get people talking about context and content, and it's just sort of dropped in like it would be in the lobby of an art gallery, and
I
it's
will
to
also
spark these conversations.
definitely,
I don't
definitely.
disagree with that either, though. To be fair, I think that's probably right.
Uh,
Make some money off Universal.
True, true. They did make money. They did make money. Of course, this is a larger conversation that goes more into the nature of remakes. But since we're primarily about the book and film, I will link in the show notes for listeners to this episode the link to Jack's article essay on Clapper, so you can read it in full as well if you're interested in this topic. And on this note, we can go into our closing of the episode. It is part of the ritual. It is part of the way we start saying goodbye. Jack, what is your favorite quote or passage from the book? Is there anything particularly emblematic that stood out to you reading it?
I'm going to upset you with this. I didn't particularly find anything to be inspiring in this in terms of passage.
Ah,
However, I do. Every time I think of positives, I always get negatives with it. But it's just the ending. I really like the not. I don't want to say it's such a dark moment. It's so lack of hope. It sounds like it like incel corn. It really like it bubbling up. But it feels like such a damning, dark, and brutal, existential thought that this man is now just lost. Nobody's there to save Norman Bates, and perhaps he wasn't there to be saved. Norman Bates hadn't been Norman Bates for a long time ago. But that passage where he writes him that there's a fly and his mother's taken over and won't kill the fly to try and infer to people who are not watching that he'll never hurt anyone again. He's so grim, and granted, it's not like a particularly horrifying in physicality or visual, is it? It's the existential nature of what that is. That man is going to rot there for 20 years because his mind is splintered to 1,000 pieces. No one there was A, interested in helping it, or B, was able to, and that's horrifying to me. So I'm not going to pick any quotes like that because nothing really jumps out to me. And it's what, and then it ended with the silliness that Randy brought up, where she's like, "Oh, you know, no." It just again, I get
Forgive
such a
and
positive with
forget.
it. Yeah, I get such a positive a high, and then I'm brought back down to earth. I'm like, we had it, we had that. We don't need to add that little bit of extra
Hmm.
texture.
You were
And
so
I, and,
close,
and again,
Robert.
yes, I just close it. Like the viewers are saying now, shut the fuck up and let it go on. Like to me, like I appreciate. There's an irony, and I appreciate it. Know when to stop. It's too much addition. You have the morbidness to it. You have the brutality. You have the it's a heartbreak, really. Not that we should really care for this person, but I think that when we get to that point, and it's a young man trying to help his mother, or at least and do terrible things, but he just doesn't want his mom to be in that. He doesn't want his mom to be in that asylum. And where do they both end up? In the asylum. And who takes over? His mother. There's a nastiness to that, a bitter bleakness, a bitter bleakness, a bitter bleakness to it.
Hey.
And I don't think an end monologue by someone who says, "Oh, he must have had it better worse than anyone." No, he killed your sister. You'll never find the body. No, there has to be a bit of a nastiness in the world. You have to have a loss of conscience. You can never trust the police again. You couldn't trust Sam ever again. Does he know more than he knows? Why did my sister lie to me? There are scars and wounds that girl will carry on, and I just don't think I think it's too neatly in a bow. So I'll leave it there. But overall, I really like the book.
Wow,
I like it as a
bleak,
counter to the film.
Mr.
Yeah.
Bleak Luke Sharp, right there.
Oh, it is.
Holy.
No, it is. There's a running theme here. it is a nastiness to it, but I just think that the book, I think it has you. I really do think the book has you, and I know the destination, but I found the journey to be really compelling. I like the fact that we go back and forth, and it had me when he said, "Oh, she's still alive," and then she goes, "Well, I buried her a few years ago. I was there," and I'm like, "Why am I second guessing myself? I know the destination, but I'm there. I'm reading the chapters. I'm really involved with it. I'm really immersed,
Yeah.
and I have to say, I was entertained. The book, to say that it's what, almost 70 years old, almost, it's at least 60 years old,
66.
66 years old. It's in its prime of its life, guy. Trust me, it does not get any worse than 66 years old. Ask Jacob. But back to the point, there is a nature to it where the book succeeds. It's compelling. It's not ostentatious. It's not um, overbearing. It's not suffocating. It's lean. You grasp it. It's simplicity. A very great point, even to a deficit, I'd say. But I was never ever bored throughout. I found it really compelling reading. Even though then you know the destination and the journey, it's still compelling enough. You have to give some credit to the book there. That being said, I do think the nature of the beast, if I hadn't seen the film and know how compelling the film is, this would lack substantially because I don't think it's got enough merit to it in terms of I know the visualization that I know the score, I know how in my head how that shower sequence goes. The two are very difficult to oppose each other. Like when we did Cloud Atlas, you've obviously got Mitchell's view of that in
In the
form.
book, yeah.
Then there were Wachowskis and Tom Tykwer doing it, and I think you can separate the two. This, it's all Hitchcock in visual, and I don't think that's a negative. I think that's a great idea of the adaptation. That's what it should be, taking a book at its core and elevating it on the cinema screen. And to that degree, I think it's a perfect adaptation.
While we're at it, then, what is your favorite scene from the film? From the 1960, of course. We don't now with the 98.
Well, why not the 98?
I mean, if you want to choose one from the
No, no, no,
98
come on,
instead,
no, I'm
you
not gonna.
really
No,
love
no, no,
those
no, no,
cutaways, to the
no, no,
semi-naked lady when the upper guest
no, no,
dies.
no, no, or the gruffing behind the wall with the eye shit. No, that didn't really do it for me. I've always found when she's driving in the car and we have just a view like there, and this is granted, this is the whole thing about tension, and we cut away and she turns right and like that, she turns right like that, and then we go into that story and we go into that, we change the car. This is going to sound perplexing, right? I love the mundanity, the mundane nature to that. I love the fact that he's taking the piss, but I love the fact he's doing it on purpose. I love the fact that he's roping you in so slowly. He's pacing it to perfection. He's slowing all that down and just seeing the utter mundane nature of what you would read in the book. The very much small steps of having a small dialogue with a person, a small dialogue here, snippets, just to build the momentum.
Hmm.
And he's doing long form in a cinema, which doesn't really mar very well in cinema. You have to cut them down because we've got to get somewhere else. We're only there for an hour and 50, not 9 hours. And then he just pulls the rug out when we get to the editing of it. Oh, that whole opening sequence, the whole first act as a passage, I think in the film is terrific. The second two, I think are still very good, but the first opening to that is 101 of immersion, tension, atmosphere, and provoking the audience into a certain avenue and misdirect. That is scholar. That is film school 101. It should be taught everywhere. It should be a visual dialogue. It should be maintained as how to do that key sequence. And yes, it's probably done better. It's probably been replicated multiple times. But I always back to that sequence, the opening thing,
Right.
for a director who knows exactly what he's doing. And I always love that enthusiasm, not ego. It's very important. Enthusiasm, acknowledgement that man knows how good he is behind the camera. He knows what he's doing. And I think when you see someone who's having entertainment with that, I think it's really compelling, really, really immersive. So I would say that I know that both of them are very broad. I like the
No,
ending,
it's
I like
fair.
the
It's fair.
beginning of
It's
the
fair.
film.
It's a very Jack answer. No, but beautifully
But
put.
thank you. I'll take that the back end of Come, you answered, but you didn't have fair enough. Fair
How,
enough.
how about you, Randy? Do you have a quote written down from the book, or you also have
Well, there's
more of a
yeah, I had a
sequence,
couple
maybe?
little quotes. One I thought was sort of darkly comic, so I just sort of jotted it down when I hit it. And this is when Norman is reflecting upon his kill. So we spent a lot of time just with prose from the characters' heads. So anyway, um, reflecting on Mary's death. Well, no sense crying over spilt milk if it hadn't been milk. If even if it hadn't been milk, I think that's what it was. So anyway, thought that was sort of cute because it was blood. Um, so and also just the pros in the shower death. So this is the end of, I want to say, chapter 4, maybe, just wherever the shower scene concludes, like the last couple lines
Yeah.
in that chapter. Mary started to scream, and then the curtains parted further, and a hand appeared holding a butcher's knife. It was the knife that, at a moment later, cut off her scream. Period. And her head. Period. So yeah, that was stark, bleak, effective, and grisly too, like for, a
Mm,
1959 film. So yeah, those were my sort of little quotes. And not necessarily a quotable film with passage, like the passages that stand out are, the things about the explanation of the mom and her boyfriend. Like it's more
yeah.
passages and
Yeah.
sequences that stand out in terms of what's written on the page. um
It's all serviceable, right? So
yeah.
in the literal sense of like in service of the
Yes.
plot at
for
hand.
for sure, for sure.
Well, for the film, do you have what's a standout scene for you?
the
There are
shower
many to choose
the
from,
shower
but
scene was all right.
that's a good one, right?
Sort of like that. But
Uh,
no, like, that's sort of the obvious one. No, I really like the parlor scene. A couple
yeah,
scenes before that, I just think that, Jack was talking about just how Hitchcock is just in control of just stretching this band of suspense, right? And this is another example of that. With, you just have a lovely set of compositions, some medium shots and some close-ups, really effectively used. You've got the shadows and the taxidermy. Your compositions are amazing. The taxidermy is just a creepy addition to that sequence. And just the back and forth between the characters, and how the performances are, with Perkins and Lee in that scene. I think that's just a really stellar scene, that sort of leads into the shower scene. So that's probably, the scene I would point there. But the whole thing's great.
yeah, scene after scene, absolutely. For me, in terms of quotes, this was probably the hardest so far of the books that we've read for the podcast to actually find like, oh my god, this is a good quote, this is a good passage. But again, because it is all serviceable for the story itself, it is after all a pulp novel, a B novel, we could even say by design. Nothing, no slight against Robert Bloch, rest in peace. But I did like early on when we have Norman kind of like arguing with his mother. There's this long passage that's written down, especially at the end of it, where it goes, he knew there was no escape for him out there, no escape anywhere from the voice that throbbed, the voice that drummed into his ears like that of the Inca corpse in the book, the drum of the dead. It plays also into
Hmm.
that foreshadowing. That's, of course, if you know Norma is dead. Hey, oh god, he's talking about the drum of the dead. It's like the Inca book, the corpse. But also, it's just very effective. Again, simple, simplistic, some could say, but it has nice flourishes to it. It has nice references. It shows he's also a man of culture, with the authors he mentions. But yeah, just the way he puts you into Norman's headspace, I found quite interesting in those chapters focused on him. And in terms of scene, I also really love the parlor scene, classic. But I just, and we haven't talked about it too much, unfortunately, but fair enough. I just really love Arbogast as a character. Just this private investigator. He's not a cop. He's here doing this private work. You know, they don't want no fuss about the money going missing. He just wants to find it for the boss. You know, um, and the entire experience. Martin Balsam in the film, in the original, but even William H Macy. To be honest, I found him to be okay, one of the better actors in the remake. But the entire exchange that he has with Norman, kind of like trying to get information, and see Anthony Perkins kind of like sweating. Is like, oh yeah, I'm saying, no, I don't see. I don't know. This girl just look at a picture. Still doesn't mind. Oh wait, actually, yeah, I forget about things. You know, now that I look at the picture better, yeah, she was here like a week ago. It's very again. There's some dark humor in it. Hitchcock always loved dark humor, but the build-up intention there as well that leads to Arbogast going into the house and having, from what I remember, like of course now I know about it and I can telegraph it, but back then I knew about the shower scene. I did not know about Arbogast's death. And the way the camera just switches to this top down shot, sorry, not point of view, and the mother just comes out on the right from the right corner behind the doorway. It's a jump scare. I would say it's like an early version of what they did in The
Mhm.
Exorcist 3, to be honest. It's effective, it's creepy, and I was talking to a friend who had this shown in class, and that's the part that gets people because everyone knows about the shower. Everyone has seen variations of that. You don't see many variations on this on Arbogast's death. So the entirety of Arbogast I really love, but just the conversation and the death are standouts. And another thing that is a standout, but also like Arbogast, like Marion Crane has to end and die, is this conversation. I had a blast talking with the two of you about Psycho, about Robert Bloch. Thank you so much both for joining me. Randy, where can our listeners find you, also hear you, but also read you?
Yes. Look, it was a joy to talk with you two fine gentlemen, and thank you very much for that. You can find me with my co-host Jakob on the Uncut Gems podcast, and we have a Patreon corner of the show too. So you can find us on Patreon, Uncut Gems Pod. You can find me on Letterboxd, and you can find my book. I've just published a book, The Top 2%. It's available worldwide through online vendors. If you happen to be living in Atlantic, Canada, I can probably get you a copy because I have a stash myself. But you can go to Feltrinelli in Italy. You can go to
Yep.
Thalia. You can go to Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, Chapters Indigo, Amazon. So it's all over the place. So you can track it down, the top 2%. So, and if you want to, you can go to Goodreads and give it a 5-star rating. That'd be great. I'd accept that without you even
Amazing.
buying the book. That'd be super.
And just share the love, spread the word about this book, of course.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Jack, how about you? Where can our listeners find you outside of getting some well-earned rest?
You can find some of my writing on Clapper, sometimes on Letterboxd. I do stints on Uncut Gems with the lovely Randy and Jakob, which is obviously always a fabulous time. Hopefully on a few more of these as well, because I really enjoy these. I do it. It's
Of
good to spend some time with
course.
some friends as well on top movies and books, which has got me into it with Pad Atlas. Really, I must have read like 16 books already this year. I'm like really into them. Yeah, I'm going to start reading. I think Train Spotting after my John Niven stuff, and I might jump on some more Cormac McCarthy. So it's been a really fabulous
Nice.
place. I know you can on podcast with Cast. Always puts on a really good show. Doing some really good stuff over there as well. The one thing I did want to mention very briefly, and it's a slight thing to serial killers. A lot of people go, America, like if you're in Texas, there's loads of serial killers. I just want to mention the really scary nature of serial killers, right? Not that this will make everyone scared, but it'll make me scared. I live in a small town, right, in West Yorkshire in Halifax, okay, which is very much middle of the country. There's about, I don't know, a few 100,000 people live here. From this town here right now, right, I am 20 minutes away from the Saddleworth Moor killers, Ian Brady and Marion Leff, where they buried those kids, where they killed loads of children. I'm 100 meters away from a victim of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, and I'm 15 minutes away from the man who was born in South Aram, who then did the 10 Rillington Place murders, who did the abortion killing in London. There's something about where I'm from right now that is
Murder
very
capital of
strange
the
in this
UK.
country, yeah, that nobody ever talks about. And I mentioned this on Gems years and years ago. I can't remember what we were doing on it. I remember reviewing Temlington Place and Letterboxd, and we talked about it on. God, it could have been Gems. It could have been Flabbercast. I don't know. It was a podcast maybe a year or so
Summer
ago.
of Sam,
And
maybe, maybe,
oh yes, it could have
maybe.
been. Yeah, yeah. And it's a fascinating thing talking about serial killers
Mm.
and murder and the psyche to it and where it comes from. I just found it really interesting to talk about like American, because in here it's not the same, but there's a it's a breeding pot allegedly. Let's hope there's nothing else that's going on. But on that really wonderful note, it's lovely to have been set with you two as well. And I love you two to pieces. And I've got Randy's book on Apple Books as well, so I'm going to give that a read. And after I've done Train Spotting, I'm going to go to the darkness of Irvin Welsh. I'm going to have the rise of Randy Burrows, and then go back to the darkness of Anthony Burgess as
Balance things out,
Orange.
Ebb
right?
and flow,
Yeah,
ebb and flow.
so yeah,
Yeah.
ebb and flow. So Randy, thank you very much for that as well, and to have you two um, to be a part of the Clapper family as well, and to do what you both do in separate things. Of you know, published author and Nick with filmmaking as well. To highlight your own mediums. You're two very talented, and I'm glad to call you my friends as well. So well done to you both, because you don't really get to give yourself some plaudits. You should both be really proud of yourself. And I love doing this. Again, I'll be on Gem soon enough, Randy, with you as well. We'll talk some
Brilliant,
smack
brilliant.
and we'll
Yep.
entertain Jakob. Yeah. But thank you again for having me, Nick. It's always a pleasure. I know my schedule's an absolute bar, Stuart, but
It's always special to have you here. I know when you can make it. I know it's
I do
it's a
appreciate it.
commitment. It's a commitment, so it really means a lot.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
Of course, listeners can always find me on Instagram at NickyGround97, Blue Sky, Letterboxd as well, NickyGround97. There you can find links to my YouTube and Vimeo, enjoy the movies for my short film projects. And of course, you can follow this podcast on Instagram at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod. You can stay tuned because we're continuing this Halloween season. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be coming back with Canadian filmmaker Anthony Leroy to talk about The Thing, the John Carpenter film, the Campbell novel, and the 1951 original adaptation. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a fantabulous day. Goodbye.